Chapter 302. Jinwan was really not a woman who liked to cry. But when she forced Emo Jingshan to sit down and tore open his shirt, she saw that not only were there wounds on his back and head, but there were also faint wounds all over his body. At the same time, when she saw beads of blood slowly rolling down the back of his neck and head, her tears immediately fell with a patter. It turned out that those people didn't just lock him up there. Before the first day he was locked up, they must have tortured him. But Emo Jingshan was too difficult for them to control. So they were discouraged and simply locked him up like this, trying to find a way to get information out of his mouth. But in the end, they still miscalculated. Emo Jingshan was about to push her hand away, but Jinwan stubbornly helped him take off his clothes. The blood on the back of his shirt had stuck to his back, and could not be taken off smoothly. Jinwan carefully tore it. Although the man did not move, she looked forward, and saw that Emo Jingshan had closed his eyes at this moment. It must still hurt. It couldn't not hurt. How could it not hurt when the blood and flesh were torn off like this? Cry out if it hurts. Jinwan raised her hand to wipe her tears, wondering whether she should tear it off all at once or slowly. But the slower she did, the more painful it would be. It won't hurt if I cry out. The man's voice seemed to be carrying a faint smile, low and heavy, which could calm her down at any time. Jinwan suddenly got up, went to the bathroom in the cabin to get a clean towel, folded it into a square, took it out, and handed it to him. Bite it first. Emo Jingshan glanced at her wet eyes and red nose, smiled slightly, reached out to take the towel, but put it aside. At the same time, he pulled Jinwan over, let her sit on his lap, held her, and raised his hand to stroke her long hair. He looked at her eyes that never shed tears no matter how she was beaten and scolded in the camp. He looked at the little woman who was not afraid of death, but now cried so much because of his wounds. The man's slender fingers ran through her hair, and finally rested on her back, gently and slowly stroking. Wan. The man's gentle and patient voice rang by her ear. Jinwan knew that she had lost her composure. She raised her hand to wipe her nose before raising her clear, slightly wet eyes to look at him. Pain is inevitable. I'm also human, and I can feel pain. But this kind of pain on the surface of my skin can't compare to what I've experienced today. He caressed her back and warmly said, in this kind of place, after experiencing this kind of experience, people will instinctively understand the fragility of life. They will cherish the peace in front of them even more. Being able to keep their lives is already a blessing. These external injuries will recover after a period of treatment. But once a person's heart is hurt, it will only get deeper and deeper. Jinwan hugged his neck and buried her face in it, not speaking. Today, you put yourself in danger, and even wanted to use your body as a bargaining chip to ensure my safety. I don't want this to happen a second time ever. His hand was wrapped around her waist. Even though he hadn't eaten for many days, his hand was still firm and strong. She knew that at that time, Emo Jingshan's emotions had been turned upside down. Jinwan obediently sat in his arms, softly making an N sound, and did not refute. Right now he was an injured patient. Whatever he said was the truth. She would not argue with him, nor would she be stubborn with him. All right, it's just an external injury. Wipe your tears. The man patted her head again. Go get some warm water, and wipe it down along the wound on my back. This way my clothes can be removed. Jinwan wiped her eyes, and stood up to do as he said. She went to the bathroom to get some warm water. Just as she was about to continue treating his wounds, she hesitated. You're already injured like this. If you touch water, won't it be fine? Since it's already like this, there's no difference whether you touch water or not. Remove your clothes first, and then disinfect them. Emo Jingshan remained calm. Compared to her flustered state, there was indeed a huge difference between a man and a woman's calmness and intelligence in the face of danger. Jinwan was about to touch the water, when Emo Jingshan suddenly glanced at the gauze on her hand. Forget it. You can do it when we go back. Your hand can't do it. I'm fine. Feng Ling has already helped me. My right fingertip isn't injured. I only need to hold onto the towel here. Otherwise, do you want Feng Ling to come in and help you take off your clothes? Emo Jingshan glanced at her hand again. After confirming that she knew what she was doing, he did not speak again. Jinwan dipped the towel in the hot water and gently poured some on his back. She felt that the muscles on the man's back had only slightly tightened. Other than that, he did not make a sound. As he said, he was also human. He would also feel pain. Jinwan helped him moisten the wound bit by bit, and then tore off the wet shirt bit by bit. This method could indeed prevent too much flesh and blood from being torn off. She then helped him wipe the area around the wound with water. After confirming that the blood had been wiped clean, she picked up the disinfectant to help him apply. Emojingtion, if it hurts, just bite the towel. Don't hold it in. It's not like I'll laugh at you. Earlier, when Feng Ling helped him apply the disinfectant to his hand, she was in so much pain that she broke out in cold sweat. However, she endured it and did not make a sound. How big of an injury was that? It was only scalded to the surface of his skin. Emojingshan's wound was deep within his flesh. The man did not speak, but she clearly heard him chuckle. Her heart ached for him, yet he was still in the mood to laugh. Jinwan's originally heavy heart suddenly calmed down due to his low chuckle. In the end, she did not hesitate, and chose to quickly help him disinfect the wound. She then applied some simple medicine, and took out some gauze from the medicine box. She wrapped it around his body, and in the end, his chest and back were wrapped like a heavily injured patient in an ancient television drama. It was almost as though he was wearing a white vest. I suddenly regret not studying medicine back then. Seeing that Emojingshan only lowered his head to take a look, but did not say anything, Jinwan felt slightly embarrassed as she muttered. Emojingshan narrowed his eyes slightly and chuckled. He calmly said, regardless of whether you study medicine or finance, you don't need to use this kind of external bandaging. However, it's still more important to understand the difference between a first kiss and artificial respiration as soon as possible. Jinwan's hand that was helping him treat the wound on his head paused. She looked at him in surprise. What artificial respiration? The man chuckled again. All right, now isn't the time to talk about this. Are you sure your hand is fine? It's not a problem. At the very least, I'll help you disinfect the wound first. Otherwise, it'll be easy to get infected in this tropical area. Jinwan continued to focus on applying medicine. However, earlier, when he said something about a first kiss and artificial respiration. Chapter 303. She had just helped Emojingshan deal with the wound on his head when the cabin door opened once more. Feng Ling was about to enter when she saw that Emojingshan's black shirt had been tossed to the side. She paused and decisively took a step back. She did not enter but said from outside, Mr. M.O., the commander of the American police force, Officer Entz, is looking for you. Jinwan rushed to hold him down. She did not wish for him to go out in his injured state. However, Emojingshan pressed down on her hand on his shoulder and patted it comfortingly. At the same time, he said to the outside, I understand. After speaking, he turned to glance at Jinwan. Officer Entz and I used to be friends. This time, he specially flew over from America to Cambodia. It's not as simple as a rescue mission. He has his own interests. Let's go talk. Rest here. Feng Ling will accompany you. Jinwan's hand left his body. Where do we talk? Not far. The people in the center of the camp have already been restrained. The surrounding area has also been surrounded by the base personnel and the police. It's very safe. We're only going to talk on paper. There won't be any violence. We'll be back soon, in? He pinched her face. It was not easy to pull him back to her side, but there were still so many follow-up problems that required him to personally deal with them. He was clearly injured to this extent, yet he could not rest properly. Jinwan was unwilling, but she could not drag him along. She nodded. All right. Emojingshan picked up the blood-stained black shirt. Jinwan was about to say that the shirt was covered in blood, but there were no other clothes he could wear here. Her words were stuck in her throat. Thankfully, the shirt was black. If she did not know better, she would not have noticed the bloodstains. Emojingshan casually buttoned up a few buttons. Aside from the light stubble on his chin and his slightly paler complexion, he did not seem to have changed much. His body was covered in injuries, but he did not appear to be in a sorry state. In comparison, Jinwan's white sarong dress was too tragic to look at. She watched as the man walked out of the cabin door. Jinwan followed him, but before she could step out, she was blocked by Feng Ling. Mrs. Mo, rest inside. Don't come out, Feng Ling said. Jinwan glanced at the camp not far away. The path she had walked for the past 2 days was covered in blood, and the gangsters lay motionless, covered in blood. The nausea in her stomach returned. She turned around and sat down in the cabin. It was indeed not suitable for her to go out. In the country, in high city, and in the peace society for too many years, this was the first time she had faced such chaos and killing. Looking at the ground covered in blood and different types of empty bullet casings, she was afraid that she would have nightmares for 2 years. Feng Ling dutifully guarded outside. After a while, she said a few words to the people outside the helicopter, and then entered the cabin. You're not going to sleep? Feng Ling asked, seeing Jinwan's eyes were wide open. A few hours ago, I fell asleep when there was a series of gunshots. I slept for a few hours, so I don't feel sleepy now. Jinwan leaned against the wall of the cabin and said with emotion, Feng Ling, I feel that these days, it's like watching a movie. Feng Ling chuckled. How can you watch a movie with your hands full of injuries? At least he survived, didn't he? At least Mo Jingshan is safe. Jinwan turned to look at her. That's true. These years, I've been on missions in the base and seen too many deaths. Being alive is indeed more important than anything else. Whether it's an unexpected experience or a peaceful life, it's all fleeting. Perhaps, as you said, as long as some things are in the past, they're just a movie in life. Feng Ling smiled. Jinwan glanced at her again. Past. Do you think the incident of taking contraceptives in T-City can be forgotten so easily? Just pretend that it never happened. Feng Ling immediately put on a serious face. For the past few days, Jinwan had not dared to smile. Now, she laughed out loud and tilted her head to look at her. I'm really curious about how you and Nanheng came to be. You used to be brothers. What happened later? Feng Ling was expressionless. Now we're still brothers. Really? Jinwan curved her lips. Why do I feel that you treat him as a brother, but he treats you as his woman? Mrs. Mo, did your hand get wet earlier? Feng Ling suddenly looked at her and stiffly changed the topic. Jinwan saw Feng Ling suddenly pick up the medicine box. Why don't I sterilize your hand again? Forget it. It hurts. Jinwan put her hand behind her back. She felt that every time Feng Ling encountered a topic related to Nanheng, she would not be so calm and even irritable. Forget it. She would not hurt her. Her own husband was not obediently resting with her. She could not even control her own man. How could she have the energy to care about Feng Ling's matters? But then again, if Mo Jingshan was like a towering ancient tree with deep roots in the soil, constantly sheltering her from the wind and rain, then perhaps Nanheng was like the wind. Not only was this kind of man unfathomable, but he was also so far away that it was hard to reach. With Feng Ling's personality, if she really became serious, who knew how badly she would be bullied? So it was better for Feng Ling to continue following her. After about 2 hours, it was already dark. Feng Ling went to get some dry bread and mineral water for Jinwan to fill her stomach. But Jinwan could not eat. Although the cabin door was closed, she could still smell the blood on the ground outside. Besides, Mo Jingshan had not eaten or drunk for so many days. He should not have eaten anything yet. How could she eat? Seeing Jinwan holding the dry bread in her hand, but staring at the gauze in her hand, Feng Ling knew that she needed some time to calm down. After all, the experience these days should be unforgettable. Feng Ling did not speak. She opened the door, got off the plane, and went outside to check on the injuries of the other brothers in the base. It was not until the surrounding dense forest was filled with the exclusive sounds of insects at night, because of the darkness, that Mo Jingshan finally returned. Mo Jingshan entered the cabin door, saw the undamaged bread and unopened mineral water in Jinwan's hands, and asked her, "Why don't you eat?" Hearing his voice, Jinwan abruptly returned to herself. She stood up and held the 2 things in her hands toward him. "For you." Mo Jingshan stared at her for a long moment before slowly smiling. He walked over and brought the little woman, who was looking forward to him, eating, into his arms. "I've already drunk some water in the afternoon and had a simple meal. I'm not hungry right now." Chapter 304. After that, I don't feel hungry anymore. I can't eat too much at once, or my stomach won't be able to take it. Tomorrow, I'll go back to eating normally. Be good and eat. Don't worry about me. As Emo Jingshan spoke, he touched her slightly ashen face. Right now you have to eat 2 people's meals. These days, you haven't even had enough nutrition. Now you can't even bear to eat bread. Those who don't know might think that I bullied Mrs. Mo. Jinwan buried her face in his chest. Thankfully, your most serious injuries are on your back. Otherwise, I wouldn't even be able to lean against your arms. Because 11 Base had wounded people who had jumped down from the helicopter and been shot at, they quickly flew out of the dense forest after cooperating with the police to take photos and collect evidence. The injured people's conditions were not stable. Thankfully, 11 Base had a doctor with them. When the plane landed, Jinwan learned that in order to take care of the injured people, they had to rest in the previous warehouse and bulletproof shed for the night. After their injuries stabilized, they would be sent back to America for better treatment. Jinwan had stayed here for 2 days and was not unfamiliar with it. However, as soon as Emo Jingshan arrived, he did not stop and directly went out with Nan Heng. Late at night, Jinwan took out the phone that Feng Ling had kept for her and glanced at the time. It was almost midnight. Injured to this extent, he still didn't rest and still had things to discuss so late at night. Did he not want his wife or his life anymore? Not long after, when Emo Jingshan entered Jinwan's cubicle, he saw that the little woman's face was unhappy. What's wrong? Nothing. I was too busy looking at my phone earlier and forgot the time. I'm going to change. You go out first. Jinwan did not look at him. Seeing that this little woman actually gave him an unpleasant look, Emo Jingshan glanced at her clothes. It was a local white dress that Feng Ling had specially bought from the farm across the Tunnel Sap Lake. It was more fitting than the one Jinwan was wearing. The style was not too plain, and was more suitable for young people. He smiled faintly. Change. Jinwan had yet to realize what his playful expression meant, and stood up to push him out. Go out. Why should I go out? Not only do I need to change, I also need to shower. Jinwan pointed to the bucket of hot water in the room. I haven't showered for days. It's so smelly. Originally, she had planned to wait for Emo Jingshan to come back, so that he could shower first. Yet it took so long for him to come back. She had a stomach full of anger. Let's not talk about the fact that there's no need for me to go out when you shower. Emo Jingshan's thin lips held in a smile. He purposely glanced at her hand, that had been wrapped up like a dumpling by the base doctor. Jinwan. In the afternoon, the bandage Feng Ling helped her bandage wasn't so thick or tight. At that time, her fingers could still move. T. T to say T. I. T T. 2. G and. T. T to T. 2. T. T. Her heart tightened. The moment she opened the door, the man's long arm reached out and closed it. Jinwan turned to look at him. In such a peaceful night, although the smell of blood on his body had faded, the two of them were injured. Their gazes met. Seeing his ink-black eyes, her heart suddenly tightened. Why don't you shower first? He glanced at her hands, and directly lifted his hand to strip her dress from her shoulders down. Jinwan. Although the man's back and head were injured, it did not affect his hands. He took it off naturally, as though he was peeling an orange. In the blink of an eye, Jinwan's almost white dress was peeled off. It's not like I haven't helped you shower before. Are you embarrassed now? After taking off her clothes, the man's tone was light. He then glanced at the wooden bucket over there. This way of bathing is really primitive. Even if I help you wash such a small wooden bucket, I don't have the extra space to do anything to you. Jinwan. Even if there's space, you can't do anything to me now. You're not allowed to do anything in the first 3 months of pregnancy. Emo Jingshan raised his eyebrows and looked at her deeply. Did Qin Sighting tell you this? No, when I was looking at my phone, I read some common knowledge about pregnancy. You're very timely. Otherwise, what do you want to do with your injuries? You haven't eaten for several days. Do you think your stamina is endless? Stamina depends on what it is. Jinwan. Sitting in this small wooden tub, Jinwan was a bit absent-minded. This kind of primitive bathing method made her wonder what kind of life the local people in Cambodia lived. When she left the airport, she saw many modern buildings and many fashionable people passing by. Their lives were also very peaceful. But in these villages near Tunnel Sap Lake, the way of life was probably very different from that in the city. Seeing Mo Jingshan roll up his sleeves and come over, Jinwan looked at the man's face through the mist and suddenly said, "Why don't you let Feng Ling help me wash?" When saying this, she actually hesitated. Although she and Feng Ling were both women, they had never been naked. If Feng Ling really came, perhaps it would also be awkward. She really didn't like others touching her. She was only used to Mo Jingshan, but Mo Jingshan's injuries were much more serious than hers. The man's hand had already reached into the water. He tested the water temperature, and then swept the water over her exposed shoulder. His tone was still light. "I don't allow others to touch you, not men, not even Feng Ling, who can switch between men and women." What did he mean by switch between men and women? Feng Ling had only been pretending to be a man in the base. She was clearly a woman inside and out. But since things had already come to this, Jinwan didn't say anything more. She leaned against the wooden bucket, allowing the man's hand to help her bathe. She said, "By the way, I might not have a chance to go back to the condo next to T University. Should I sell it or—" Before she could finish speaking, she suddenly felt her vision darken. She opened her eyes to see that the man had lowered his head. His cool, pleasant scent drowned her senses. Her breath was immediately filled with his scent. She was startled. What are you doing?" The man raised her chin with his fingers. He looked at her cheeks that had become much thinner and said hoarsely, "Wait a moment before bathing. Let's kiss for a while first." Chapter 305. He said he would kiss for a while longer. But once they started, it was almost impossible to stop. Jinwan pushed him away symbolically. Usually, she couldn't push him away. Now that her hands were wrapped up, she couldn't move at all. Their lips and teeth intertwined. She closed her eyes, and the man's arms held her armpits, almost carrying her out of the water. Jinwan still remembered the injury on his back. Right now he definitely couldn't push his arms forward like this. She subconsciously moved back, and her bright red lips moved. "Don't. You're injured." Even though she ended the long kiss before it got out of hand, when she spoke, her face was still flushed, and she looked even more charming in the steam rising from her face. Mo Jingshan planted a kiss on the corner of her lips, then on her cheeks, and finally on her ears. His clear, low, and husky voice was very, very gentle. "Do you know what I was thinking when you suddenly knelt before me that day?" "What were you thinking?" "I wanted to fly back to High City immediately. I'd rather have you kneel in bed with your back facing me and beg for mercy than see you kneel before me in that way." When Mo Jingshan finished speaking, he suddenly bit her fair ear. Jinwan shivered in pain, and then heard the man say hoarsely, "You knew I was trying my best to bear it, yet you still dared to kneel. You did it on purpose, eh?" Jinwan shrank her neck in the water. She felt the man's pressure pressing against her, and she was almost squeezed into this small wooden bucket. "I knew you hadn't eaten or drunk anything for several days, and I was afraid your body wouldn't be able to take it. I was too anxious, and those people kept staring at me. If I didn't pretend to be too helpless, I might have been shot in the head at any time. I still have to live and soar together with you. I don't want to die." Jinwan's voice became softer and softer, until it became a soft murmur. He stared at her and did not speak. His hand touched the back of her head, pausing on her black hair. Jinwan's heart swelled under his gaze. "Mo Jingshan, en?" She pursed her lips, and her tone carried a hint of lingering fear. "They said you haven't been involved in the underworld. So after this, can we directly return to High City? Or do you want to return to America with Nan Hung and the others?" The man looked at her face under her long hair and smiled. He touched her wet hair. "Do you want to go back to High City? It's still more comfortable at home. I might need some time to digest and forget what happened in the past few days. I'm afraid the baby in my tummy won't be able to take it if I keep feeling so nervous." As she spoke, she gently stroked her flat belly with her hand that had been submerged in the water. Mo Jingshan's gaze was gentle. Watching her movements underwater, his lips curved up slightly. "All right. Once this matter is settled, We'll return to High City. Okay, I'll bathe for a while. You don't have to help me. Just soak in the water for a while. I'll help you when you bathe. Mo Jingshan made an sound, turning to pick up the clean white dress she had placed on the bed, placing it by the side. After the bath, she came out of the wooden tub. Perhaps it was because she hadn't had such intimate contact in a long time. Or perhaps it was because she had just experienced a life and death situation. But she felt a little embarrassed to have this familiar yet strange man help her bathe. Thus, when Mo Jingshan was about to help her put on the dress, Jinwan looked at him with a bashful expression. Can't you close your eyes? Mo Jingshan glanced at her cheeks, which were red from being soaked in the hot water, or because of a moment of shyness. No. Jinwan. Very good. He had just returned, and he had regained his rights as a husband. After a few seconds of stalemate, Jinwan compromised and raised her arm. When the man helped her put on the dress, to relieve the awkwardness of standing naked before him, Jinwan cleared her throat. Don't you think I've gained a little weight? Mo Jingshan was helping her tie the white ribbon in front of her dress. His slender fingers shuffled through the ribbon, his voice mild. After these days of struggle, you've clearly lost weight. How could you have gained weight? But I'm pregnant. Anyone who is pregnant will gain weight. The man helped her tie the ribbon, and raised his hand to push her long hair behind her back. There was no hairdryer here, so she could only let it dry naturally. At the same time, because of her words, he carefully looked at her from head to toe and finally commented, You've lost at least 5 pounds. She said she was fat, but he insisted on saying she was thin. Also, who told you that pregnant people will definitely gain weight? How long have you been pregnant? Your belly will only be visible after at least 2 months. There won't be any changes to your figure. How did you know? Have you read any pregnancy-related books? Mo Jingshan glanced at the little woman who suddenly leaned into his arms. She had just bathed, and her cheeks were still slightly red. His Adam's apple moved. He stared at the side of her face. Under the light in the cubicle, he could clearly see her thick, long eyelashes and the warm, clear outline of her cheeks. 2 months ago, when Auntie Chen had nothing to do, she would always talk about these things by my side, asking me to pay attention to whether you were pregnant or not. She was worried that there would be no one to take care of you in Tea City, so she would often nag at me after I got off work and returned to the Yew Garden. The man's voice was mild and hoarse. Grandfather and Auntie Chen together are like a large army, a captain and a deputy captain. She watched as Mo Jingshan, dressed in a blood-stained black shirt, and filled with a dispirited and cold aura, transformed back into a clean, white t-shirt President Mo. Jinwan sat on the bed watching the man clean his stubble, and was almost dazed. Most adult men would grow stubble if they did not shave for a day or two. In the past, Mo Jingshan had always been clean like this. His image was good, and his aura was excellent. Whenever he stood there, he would be a scenery. However, his unkempt appearance these days gave off a different feeling. It was not ugly, and it could even move the tiny bit of worship and excitement hidden in a woman's heart. He was especially good-looking and attractive. However, she quickly returned to her senses. Earlier, when she was helping him bathe, she saw that the wound on his back needed to be treated by the base doctor again. Thus, she quickly kept the blood-stained black shirt on the ground. Thankfully, Nanhing's figure is similar to yours. His t-shirt doesn't look out of place on you at all. However, when Jinwan walked past him, she spoke with a young maiden's heart pounding. You look much more approachable in a t-shirt than in a shirt. Chapter 306. Hearing this, Mo Jingshan gave her a meaningful look. She put away the red hearts that were about to pop out of her eyes, turned around, and walked out quickly with his clothes in her arms. At the same time, she went to look for the base doctor who had just gotten free, and asked him to help disinfect and apply medicine to Mo Jingshan's wounds. The base doctor had just come over from the more seriously injured patients, and was about to come to see Mr. Mo. Seeing Mrs. Mo come out, he nodded politely to Jinwan, and walked straight inside. Are you feeling refreshed after taking a shower, changing your clothes, and seeing your man return safely? Even when you walk, you look like you're floating. A voice came from outside the door. It was cold and indifferent with a hint of mockery. Jinwan looked sideways and saw the figure standing in front of the door with a cigarette in his mouth. She saw Nan Heng take the cigarette out of his mouth and narrowed his eyes coldly at her. I've been nervous for a few days, and I've just relaxed a little. Can't you let me get carried away? She laughed. Nan Heng snorted. My t-shirt is new and I haven't worn it yet. It should fit your man, right? It fits quite well. Both of you are 1.88 meters tall. Jinwan casually replied. As long as it fits. Nan Heng glanced at her again. But in this base, only you and Feng Ling are women. Feng Ling is a little taller than you, and she only has the base's combat uniform. It's not suitable for you to wear it, so we can only buy this kind of skirt. Jinwan tugged at the hem of her dress. I look good too. It's rare for me to wear such a loose dress. It's quite ethnic. I didn't realize it in the past, but Miss Ji has really become more and more easygoing. Compared to her arrogant self in the past, it's been especially obvious in the past few days. This Nan Heng really wanted to diss her for no reason at all. Jinwan was used to it. She only smiled and did not say much. She was about to take the black shirt out when Nan Heng glanced at it, asking, Are you going to wash this? Yeah. It's covered in blood, and the back is damaged in many places. I can't wear it even if I wash it. What's the point of washing it? Wash it and bring it back. It's good to keep it as a souvenir. Nan Heng sneered and looked at her as if she was crazy. Commemorate what? To commemorate the life and death of your man? Or to commemorate the bloody scene in this broken place? These words really made people lose their appetites. Jinwan pursed her lips and was hesitating whether she should throw the shirt away. All of a sudden, Nan Heng seemed to recall something. He glanced at her and asked, You didn't tell him that you washed our socks for us, did you? No. Jinwan had yet to finish when she suddenly heard Mo Jingshan's voice behind her. What do you mean by washing socks? Jinwan. Nan Heng. Nan Heng narrowed his eyes and took a puff of his cigarette. Then, he threw the cigarette butt on the ground and stepped on it to extinguish it. He said indifferently, Akib and Dolly are still in the jungle, and there's always a team of people protecting them. The hidden position should be the ambush point that they had set up before entering, and they're just waiting for us to go over. But it's useless even if they manage to escape for one night. Tomorrow morning, Officer Entz and I will go in and search again to see if they've already been blown up by the minefield. Rest well. Before Mo Jingshan could speak, Jinwan turned to look at him. Didn't the base doctor go in earlier? Why did you come out without treating your wound? The doctor is currently preparing medicine. He'll return in 5 minutes to apply the medicine. Mo Jingshan looked at her, and then at the shirt in her hands. Throw it away. Jinwan thought about it and agreed. This shirt was not only stained with Mo Jingshan's blood, but also those people's blood. Thinking that those people were almost all dead by now, she felt a chill run down her spine, and decisively threw the clothes away. Nan Heng suddenly clicked his tongue. I asked you to throw it away, but you didn't. You even said that you wanted to keep it as a souvenir. Your man just casually said 3 words. And you threw it away? That's right. Otherwise, why would he be my man? Jinwan glanced at him and then smiled at Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan's expression did not change, but it was clear that his mood was good because of Jinwan's words. The corners of his lips turned up slightly. Nan Heng smiled insincerely. You're just forcing dog food on people. I really wonder if there's anyone who can coexist peacefully in front of you. There is. Feng Ling is very calm. Jinwan glanced at him indifferently. And no matter how I show off my love, Feng Ling's heart is unmoved. She doesn't even seem to have any interest in things like love and men. Nan Heng. That night, Jinwan was finally able to sleep peacefully by Mo Jingshan's side. However, in her dreams, she held onto his hand tightly and did not let go. It was only when the sky was about to brighten that her fingers gradually loosened due to her deep sleep. After the storm of the past few days, Jinwan was very sensitive here. However, because Mo Jingshan was by her side, she could finally sleep peacefully. However, she was still afraid that if anything happened, he would suddenly disappear from her sight. After a night of peaceful sleep, they slept peacefully. Early in the morning, Jinwan turned over. In this kind of warehouse, Every cubicle was occupied. The conditions were not very good. The environment was too stuffy. There were no windows or air conditioning. There was only a small fan on the ground, blowing against the bed and causing the bedsheets to sway. Her hand was slightly cold. She did not touch Jinxin. Jinwan subconsciously opened her eyes and glanced to the side. As expected, he was not there. Jinwan panicked and rushed to get off the bed. However, because the cubicle was too small and the fan was too close, her foot tripped over the electric wire. Her entire body fell to the ground. Thankfully, her hands were fast and she pressed against the side of the bed. She did not fall too badly and only knelt heavily on the ground. Due to the electric wire being kicked down, the fan stopped working and fell to the ground. Jinwan hissed in pain. She staggered and was about to stand up with the support of the bed when the cubicle door was suddenly pushed open. Hearing the sound, Jinxin, who had rushed over, saw Jinwan half kneeling on the ground and immediately came over to help her up. "Why did you fall? Didn't you notice the electric wire on the ground?" Seeing that he was still fine, Jinwan momentarily forgot about the pain in her knee. She released a long breath. "I saw that you weren't here and thought you." She paused and glanced at the electric wire on the ground. She pursed her lips and said, "I'll be more careful next time. I won't be so careless in the future." Knowing that she was still a little scared, Jinxin did not expose her brave armor. He held her hand and glanced at the bandaged area. "Remember to change your dressing today. It's not good to keep your hand bandaged in a tropical area like this. Tell the base doctor to pay more attention. Don't overlook your hand injury." Chapter 307. Jinxin knew that Jinwan would be more sensible in such an environment. She knew her limits. She did not wish to cause trouble for others, so he did not say more. He pinched her sleepy little face. "Go wash up and eat something." At this moment, someone called out to him from outside. It sounded like someone was calling Mr. Mo. He glanced at Jinwan. Seeing that she had already turned to retrieve the toothbrush and toothpaste Feng Ling had prepared for her, he turned to leave. Jinwan left the warehouse and was brushing her teeth against the grass by the side when she suddenly heard a loud noise from the forest. It was deafening, causing her hands to tremble. Jinxin had just brought her a bowl of porridge when he heard the noise. He placed the things in his hands down and headed toward the forest. Jinwan wanted to call out to him, but her mouth was stuffed with the toothbrush. The white foam stuck to the corner of her lips. She rushed to rinse her mouth with water. By the time she turned back, Jinxin had already walked far away. "Mrs. Mo, don't go over." Seeing that Jinwan was about to follow, Feng Ling rushed over to press her shoulder. "A large area of the forest has been detonated. There will be a series of explosions. You don't have to worry." "Then what are they going to do?" Jinwan's intuition told her that Jinxin's gaze had suddenly darkened. Something must have happened. Then she saw more than 20 people in the base, rushing toward the dense forest. They were all dressed in black, with knives and guns at their waists. They looked serious. And the people in front were also wearing bulletproof vests and explosion-proof shields. This scene looked as serious and tense as yesterday in the hinterland of the camp. Nanheng was nowhere to be found. The leader of the group was currently giving out orders. Jinwan asked, "Did something happen inside?" "Last night, I heard that their leader, the one named Akib, escaped." "He escaped, but they won't be able to escape from this forest." Feng Ling tried her best not to hide anything from Jinwan, to prevent her imagination from running wild. She directly said, "But I didn't expect Akib to be so scheming. They had already kidnapped 8 children from the village on the other side of Tunnel Sap Lake and locked them near a minefield behind the forest. Right now they can't escape, but they are using the lives of those innocent children to threaten us, demanding that we let them leave the forest safely. Otherwise those children will." "8 children?" Jinwan frowned. "Yes, the average age of those children is less than 6 years old, and they've been locked up for a few days. We don't know how they're doing for the time being. But Nanheng just sent a message saying that a child accidentally ran into a minefield in order to escape, causing the entire minefield to explode." "What about the child?" "Dead." Feng Ling's voice was heavy. "One dead." 7 left. The average age of these children was less than 6 years old. How deranged were these people? They actually captured so many children to be his escape plan. A group of innocent children had been implicated because of their conflict with Akib's group. They did have the responsibility to save those children. While Jinwan was thinking, Mo Jingshan had already returned. His gaze swept past her and landed on Feng Ling. Finally he looked at Jinwan. Wash up and go eat. Seeing his expression, Jinwan asked, Are you going in with them? Yes. But you are still injured. Don't move. Besides, Nan Hung and the people from the base, including Officer Entz, are enough. There's no need for you to go. Akib's target is me. Jinwan's voice was immediately choked in her throat. She wanted to speak, but right now, he no longer had the time to speak. He only indicated for Feng Ling to bring Jinwan back to the room in the warehouse. Jinwan's voice was tense. You are injured. Mo Jingshan glanced at her. Soon those children will lose their lives. Jinwan's ears suddenly rang with the sound of the explosion. Thinking of the scene of those innocent children being blown to death, she felt as though all the blood in her body was flowing backwards. She found it difficult to breathe. Although she knew that those innocent children were implicated because of them. Although she knew that Mo Jingshan would not sit back and watch. But there was still a selfish corner of her heart that wanted her to open her mouth and beg him not to go. After a pause, Jinwan said, I'll go with you. You stay here. He decisively cut her off. Feng Ling, watch over her. But you're injured like this. If I go with you, I might still be able to. You stay here obediently. You're not allowed to go anywhere. These few words were unprecedentedly stern. Mo Jingshan expressionlessly stared at Jinwan. It was almost an order. Jinwan froze in her spot and did not move. Mo Jingshan gave Feng Ling a look. Feng Ling directly went to hold Jinwan's hand. Jinwan opened her mouth to say something, but in the end, she could only close it. She could not say a single word. Mo Jingshan turned toward the group of people. After taking several steps, he suddenly tilted his head to the side. Stay here well. Don't get hurt. It had been more than an hour since Mo Jingshan and the others flew into the forest on the helicopter. A series of explosions rang out. It was unknown where the landmines had been stepped on, but it was also unknown which side had opened fire. Here, Jinwan could only hear the various sounds of explosions in the forest. She could not hear anything else. She ran out of the warehouse uncontrollably and looked inside. Feng Ling was also relatively silent. She did not comfort or persuade her as she usually would. It was clear that Akib had set up an ambush near the dangerous minefield. This was not an ambush but an unavoidable ground full of bombs. No matter how powerful a person was, it was very likely that they would not be able to withstand this kind of danger. The person Jinwan was most worried about was Mo Jingshan. And the person Feng Ling had to worry about, aside from Mr. Mo, was also Nan Hung, and the group of brothers who had gone through life and death with her. Jinwan recalled that before Mo Jingshan went to sleep yesterday, he had helped her switch the electric fan to the lowest setting. When she straightened her back, her body trembled in pain and she almost fell. In this state, if he went in, how was he going to save those children? She suddenly turned to Feng Ling. The person you care about the most is here. Would you rather go in with him? Even if you die together with him, it's still better than worrying alone outside? Feng Ling paused. Obviously, Jinwan's words had hit her heart, but she still said mildly, Mr. Mo said that I must watch over you. You can't go anywhere. Jinwan looked at a small helicopter parked not far away, and then at the key on Feng Ling's waist. She suddenly curved her lips and said meaningfully, I'm quite good at driving. I've always been good at controlling the direction. I heard that this kind of helicopter is not as complicated as a commercial plane. Tell me, can I drive it? Mrs. Mo, don't be impulsive. Feng Ling, my man is there. No. Chapter 308. The location of the incident was the minefield in the forest closest to Tunnel Sap Lake. Dolly and several of his subordinates had escorted Akib here. They had already abducted the children from the nearby farms. Indeed, as Feng Ling had said, of the 8 children, 1 had already died. When the explosion rang out, The 7 young children watched in horror and confusion as their little friend was suddenly thrown into the air by the explosion. Blood splattered everywhere, and he fell to the ground like a piece of charred wood. They were clearly little friends who had grown up together. A few days ago, they had even played and laughed together. Today he was lying in the charred flames. His entire body was black, and blood was dripping from his body. He was motionless. The police asked them to let the children go, and they could negotiate. However, Akip's only condition was for Mo Jingshan to personally talk to them. Rather than talk to them face to face, it would be more accurate to say that the 7 children's bargaining chips were not big. Their biggest bargaining chip was still Mo Jingshan. Either they used Mo Jingshan to exchange for the 7 children's lives, or these 7 children would accompany them to be buried in this minefield. Furthermore, there were already fuses buried near the minefield. If they could not come to an agreement, none of the people who entered this area would be able to escape. The entire forest would explode one after another, and the area several miles around Tunnel Sap Lake would be affected by the explosion. When Jinwan and Feng Ling rushed to the scene, the police and 11 base members that Ince had brought along had already set up a cordon. The minefield was separated from the safe zone. Akib, Dolly, and the others were already surrounded. However, because the 7 children's lives were in their hands, they could not charge in recklessly. Officer Ince did not approach to question them when he saw that they were people brought by Feng Ling. Right now, he did not have the time to deal with anyone. He even angrily pushed away his subordinates who were whispering suggestions to him. He only watched the 7 frightened children as he racked his brains to think of a solution. Officer Ince looked at Feng Ling, and Feng Ling Jinwan did not go over to disturb the officer. She saw that their helicopters were parked behind, and she did not see Mo Jingshan. She felt uneasy and approached the people from 11 base, attempting to gather information. After asking for a long time, the answer she finally came up with was this. One of the children had indeed died, and the remaining 7 might not be able to be rescued at all. However, they could not just give up on these innocent children. When the Cambodian local police heard the news, they said that they would immediately arrange for reinforcements. However, they had not arrived yet. It was likely that they were waiting for the minefields to be detonated before coming over to deal with the aftermath. The 7 children were covered in blood. Over the past few days, they had either been beaten or scolded. Some who had fainted from hunger had been beaten awake by them. Now these children were forced to stay by Akib's side. No matter what they did, they would hurt the children. The child who had been killed in the explosion was only 6 years old. He had been making too much noise and had tried to escape. In the end, he had stepped into a minefield and been shot by Akib's men. Outside the cordon, Jinwan couldn't see the specific situation inside, nor could she see Akib's group. But just by listening, Jinwan already had a clear and shocking picture in her mind. On the other side, Mo Jingshan calmly watched the people guarding the cabin door. These people were all Nan Heng's subordinates. They had been guarding outside the cabin door for a long time, preventing him from personally appearing at Akib's side. Around the helicopter, in the depths of the forest, there were lush greenery everywhere. The originally peaceful environment was now charred black and filled with an austere atmosphere. In the dense forest surrounded by layers of police, Akib's group could vaguely be seen moving about. Due to the safety of the children, no one dared to charge in. Nan Heng. Mo Jingshan glanced at Nan Heng, who had just returned. Have your men retreat. Before Nan Heng could speak, at this moment, the surrounding police suddenly retreated in large numbers. From a small circle to a larger circle, their footsteps were hurried and urgent. The reason was that one of the children had suddenly rushed out. He ran alone, and the others frantically followed him. The 7 children's cries were filled with fear and misery. Akib's men directly raised their guns and fired several shots into the air. The group of children were frightened into kneeling on the ground and did not dare to move. The scene was extremely chaotic. In an instant, they pulled the children back and mercilessly pressed the muzzle of the gun against their heads. The children were crying. The police kept shouting, attempting to pacify the children and the furious Akib's subordinates. Akib's men were shouting for the children to squat down and not allow them to run around. The children were so frightened that their bodies trembled as they squatted down. Their small bodies were curled into a ball, covered in dirt and blood. Those people were still talking to Officer Entz. Officer Entz looked at the children's frightened and despairing eyes, and gestured for the surrounding people to retreat further, step by step. The helicopter that Emo Jingshan was in was less than 10 meters away from them. The cabin door was tightly guarded by Nan Heng's men. Just as those people raised their guns to the children's heads and pulled the trigger, Emo Jingshan did not think twice and directly went down the cabin door to go over. He did not know that Jin Wan was already not far behind the helicopter. He did not know that the scene of him walking out of the helicopter had entered her eyes. Thus, when Akib's impatient gunshot was aimed at one of the children's legs, Jin Wan saw Emo Jingshan abruptly push aside the group of people blocking in front of him. She only heard the gunshot. From her position, she could only see Emo Jingshan's figure flash by. However, with just a quick glance, Jin Wan also saw that the back of his white t-shirt had already begun to bleed. He must have used too much force when he pushed those people away. The wound on his back could not be easily pulled, so it must have opened up again. The wound had just been treated by the base doctor last night. Right now, it must have worsened again. Officer Entz was currently holding a walkie-talkie to speak with Nan Heng's men. 11 base's people were able to receive the information and make a decision in time. Jin Wan could not approach, but by listening, she roughly understood the situation inside. For example, a child's calf had been pierced by a bullet, and the ground was covered in blood. The group of children was scared silly. They did not even dare to cry. They all squatted there like mutes, staring in horror at the blood slowly flowing past their feet. Another example was that Akib's feet should be the spot where they had set up an ambush to detonate the minefield. If they did not let them leave, or if they did not allow Emo Jingshan to talk to him face to face, he would immediately detonate the minefield and bring the hundreds of people here down with him. Chapter 309. Looking at the child whose legs were crippled, the crowd was silent. No one spoke, but the 11 base's men's hands tightened on their guns. Akib was truly impatient. From the start, he had already prepared for the worst. He pointed his gun at the children's backs, his feet moving slowly on the ground. The moment the police dared to make a move, he could instantly detonate the bomb here. Not a single one of them could live. The crowd watched this scene. Only Jin Wan did not. As the crowd continued to retreat, she could finally see Emo Jingshan through the gaps in the crowd. She stared at Emo Jingshan. Everyone was retreating, except for him, who was moving forward. When Emo Jingshan's figure finally appeared, Akib's raging expression finally calmed down. Mr. Emo. Officer Entz was about to step forward to stop him, but was stopped by Emo Jingshan's slightly raised arm. I'll go over. Emo Jingshan's tone was mild. Nan Heng, who stood by the side, knew that he could not stop him at this time. He gave the brothers in the base a look, and everyone raised their guns, preparing to move at any moment. However, the two sides were in a deadlock. Neither side dared to move. Emo Jingshan's appearance attracted the attention of everyone on Akib's side. Jin Wan watched as Emo Jingshan walked into the danger zone. She glanced at the surrounding people and carefully hid behind the crowd. Behind this circle of people, there was a person slowly moving his feet bit by bit. Akib's men's attention was focused on Emo Jingshan, Officer Entz, and Nan Heng. As long as they did not make any suspicious movements or commands, it meant that they were temporarily safe. Without their orders, no one dared to make a move. Just as Feng Ling, who had arrived at the last moment, was preparing to sneak an attack, she saw that Jin Wan had already walked around the crowd. Her expression faltered. She wanted to rush over, but she could not make any movements right now. She softened her footsteps and chased after her. While everyone was watching Emo Jingshan's footsteps, Akib glanced at Dolly. Dolly sneered. He was already prepared to use Emo Jingshan as the final bargaining chip to save his life. However, they did not notice that there was someone behind them. All of the police officers were still moving backward. Akib saw that Emo Jingshan was about to enter his reach, and was about to blurt out the conditions he had prepared for the negotiation. He did not notice anything strange. It was at this moment that Emo Jingshan and Nan Heng noticed the white figure at the back of the crowd. As Emo Jingshan's footsteps abruptly paused, Nan Heng suddenly raised his hand. Bang! A gunshot rang out. Nan Heng fired a shot toward the sky, just as Akib and the others' attention was diverted and Akib was about to raise his gun to aim at Emo Jingshan. Another unexpected gunshot rang out from behind. Bang! It was not as heavy as Nan Heng's spear, but it tore through the air almost imperceptibly. Before Akib could react when he heard the sound, he was suddenly shot in the shoulder. His hand that was holding the gun lost its balance, and he swayed forward. At this critical moment, Nan Heng and Officer Ince each fired at Akib and his men's heads. Because Akib and his men were too shrewd, they had calculated their numbers from the start. Each person's position was closely watched by them, and they were unable to successfully sneak past them. They planned to strike first. This shot that no one expected had indeed opened the door for them to strike first. Feng Ling had already rushed over. Feng Ling rushed over and stared in disbelief at Jin Wan, who had just fired a shot. She abruptly stepped forward, pressed her hand down, and dragged her to hide behind a tree to avoid being shot by Akib's men. At the same time, she glanced at the gun in Jin Wan's hand. Mrs. Emo, why do you have a gun? Jin Wan had yet to recover from the shock of actually being able to fire a shot. She stared blankly at Feng Ling, before slowly returning to her senses. Yesterday, Jing Shin placed a gun in my sleeve. Earlier on, before you and I rushed over, I brought it with me. But I didn't expect that I would really be able to use it. Seeing Jin Wan's dazed expression, Feng Ling held back her laughter and said, Good job. At the same time, Feng Ling directly took the gun. She fiddled with it for a moment before handing it back to her. Put it away. I'll put the trigger back in. Don't accidentally hurt yourself. Jin Wan recalled how she had fired the gun earlier. She was truly dazed and suddenly felt a little terrified. Forget it, I'll just not hold it. Before we leave Cambodia, keep it on you for self-defense. Without another word, Feng Ling placed the gun back into her sleeve. She then pulled Jin Wan and turned to leave. Come with me first. It's not safe here. At this moment, a loud shout suddenly came from the crowd. A police officer who had just surrounded them shouted in English, Dolly has a bomb on him. He's going to launch a suicide attack. However, there was a limit to how fast a person could react. By the time everyone realized what was going on, when everyone's guns were pointed at them, no one dared to fire at Dolly. Everyone was moving at a high speed. It was impossible to aim 100%. Once someone shot Dolly, no one dared to imagine what would happen. After all, there were bombs below them, and they were surrounded by minefields. Dolly also had a bomb on him. But could they just let Dolly jump into the crowd and cause the first explosion? In that instant, Emo Jingshan, who was being held back by the police, and was only a few meters away from Dolly, pushed the crowd aside. Dolly sneered and raised his gun to shoot himself. In an instant that no one expected, the white figure suddenly pounced toward him. Dolly was about to shoot himself. Dolly, who was standing several meters away from Emo Jingshan, suddenly threw himself at him. Moreover, he succeeded in pressing Dolly under his body. Unexpectedly, Emo Jingshan, who was injured and had been protected by the police, suddenly came over. Dolly was knocked to the ground, and the gun in his hand fell to the ground. It slipped out of his hand and slid forward a few meters. He hurriedly reached out to grab it back, but the person on his back held him down. Dolly simply turned around and wrestled with the person on his back. It was Emo Jingshan. Behind the crowd, Jin Wan was being dragged away by Feng Ling. When she saw the scene inside, she almost screamed out loud. Dolly's body was tied with a bomb. Emo Jingshan's upper body was dressed in white, and a large patch of blood had already seeped out of his back. The police watched this scene in shock. For several seconds, no one dared to step forward. Only the people from 11 Base were about to rush in to save Mr. Emo, but were warned by Officer Ince's men not to go over. The bomb on Dolly's body could explode at any moment due to the scuffle. Chapter 310. Nan Heng could not stand Officer Ince's cautious personality. Without thinking, he abruptly pulled out his gun and fired at Dolly's leg. At the same time as his gunshot, another gunshot rang out. It was Feng Ling, who was standing by Jinwan's side. She had fired accurately and moved at the same frequency as him. The bullet also struck Dali's other leg at the same time. Dali's face contorted in pain. He was still half a meter away from the gun on the ground, but he still had to struggle to reach it. Mo Jingshan endured the pain and stood up, rushing forward. Meanwhile, Dali was still crawling on the ground. The moment Mo Jingshan picked up the gun, his gaze shifted. He only hesitated for half a second before pulling the trigger and aiming it at Dali's forehead. Nan Heng furrowed his brows and abruptly leaped forward. Pung. A sound. Nan Heng's shot directly struck Dali's forehead. Pung. Another sound. Another hit. Pung. Another sound. It was Mo Jingshan who had accurately shot Dali in the middle of his forehead when he was about to die with his eyes wide open. Dali's eyes instantly closed. He was completely dead. Fresh blood flowed down the grass beneath him. You. Nan Heng's hand stiffened. His gaze was astonished. Back then, Mo Jingshan had promised Elder Mo that he would not involve himself in the underworld, would not stain his hands with blood, and would not take human lives. But no matter how Nan Heng tried to stop him, he still killed Dali with his own hands. Mo Jingshan did not explain. As he tossed the gun aside, his gaze coldly stared at the dead man on the ground. His tone was mild. Come and defuse the bomb. Don't waste words. Nan Heng. He turned to look coldly at Officer Entz, who was still hesitating on whether to approach. By the time Officer Entz reacted and was about to call for help, the people from 11 Base had already rushed over. Jinwan stood outside the crowd. Her hand was held tightly by Feng Ling. She looked at the man whose back was already soaked in blood. Her heart was filled with an indescribable feeling. She only felt that her eyes were instantly wet. Only she knew why Mo Jingshan insisted on killing Dali with his own hands. Because when she was trapped in the camp for days, it was Dali who kept beating her, kicking her, and threatening her. It was also Dali who forced her to kneel down in front of Mo Jingshan to save her life. It was also Dali who said he was going to use Jinwan as an appetizer. This man had become a nightmare that Jinwan couldn't get rid of in the short term. This spear shot at the brink of death was worth it. That plain white t-shirt was now stained with blood, and it was impossible to tell whose blood it was. Finally, the police rushed over and took away the children who needed to be taken away. Those who needed to be defused did so, and those who needed to check the bodies of Akib and his accomplices went to check the bodies. Jinwan took the opportunity when Feng Ling's hand finally loosened a little to abruptly pull her hand out and rush toward him. There were policemen all around, and they all recognized her. No one intended to stop her. Mr. Mo, your injury is now. The people at the base were about to ask him to hurry back and bandage his wound. It's fine. Take these children away first. Mo Jingshan was covered in blood, and his eyes were cold. He just stood there, but no one dared to approach him. Jinwan ran to his side, supported him, and asked anxiously, "How are you?" He seemed to realize that it was really Jinwan who broke the deadlock, and suddenly shot Akib in the back. Jinwan pressed her hand against his arm, and was about to continue speaking, when she suddenly felt a pain in her hand. The man abruptly pulled her away, and held her hand tightly in his palm. The pain made her face pale, and she looked at him in surprise. "What did I tell you before I left? Didn't I tell you to wait where you are?" The man's eyes were cold and sharp. When he looked at her, there was not the slightest warmth in his eyes. The coldness in his eyes made Jinwan freeze on the spot. Her mouth moved, but for a moment she couldn't speak. She couldn't explain a word. Should she say that she was worried about him? Or should she say something to coax him not to be angry? No matter what she said, she couldn't stop the blood from flowing out of his back. Jinwan abruptly held his arm with force, holding on with all her might to prevent him from pushing her away. She said calmly, "The injury on your back can't be ignored anymore. Let's go back and find a doctor. His injury should be very serious." Earlier, not only did his wound tear, but he had also been attacked several times in the same spot. The injury that had already penetrated deep into his flesh was most likely even more serious now. Mo Jingshan did not move much before Jinwan forcefully pulled him away. Jinwan held him, passing by the terrible blood and mess on the ground. She did not even glance at it. She only wanted to take Imo Jingshan away from this place. The police and the people at the base were all busy. The gloomy weather that had been gloomy all morning suddenly became gloomy, until it began to rain. Jinwan raised her head to look up. As she supported Imo Jingshan toward the direction of the helicopter, she asked, "It's raining. Will there still be any danger of explosions here?" "Yes, most of the landmines here were buried during the war decades ago. The dense forest is thick with branches and leaves. The rain is not heavy, so it won't penetrate through. The ground is still dry. If the rain gets heavier, the areas that need to be exploded will still explode, but they won't be connected together. The area of explosion will shrink, and the forest won't be on fire." After speaking, Imo Jingshan suddenly coughed. Jinwan rushed to support him. "Those children have been rescued. Leave the rest to the police. Let's go find a doctor first." Before she finished, all of a sudden, there was a pung sound from behind them. A gunshot. Very close. Jinwan's entire body trembled. Before she could react, she was abruptly pressed into Imo Jingshan's arms. In the next moment, the bullet almost brushed past their shoulders and landed heavily on the helicopter, leaving a deep dent in the hard steel body. Jinwan raised her head from Imo Jingshan's arms to see that Akib, who had been pretending to be dead for a long time, was lying on the ground covered in blood. With only one breath left, he actually took the opportunity when the police were dealing with the bomb on Dolly's body to shoot them. Thankfully, Feng Ling was close. She reacted quickly and fired at the same time, hitting Akib's wrist. This shot that was originally aimed at killing them was directly deflected. Following that, Feng Ling expressionlessly walked toward Akib step by step. She shot at various parts of his body. Akib's entire body twitched as the bullets continuously pierced through him. Finally, he breathed his last breath. Jinwan looked at Akib, who was covered in bloody holes, and was completely stunned. It was not until the man who had been protecting her in his arms suddenly went limp and knelt on the ground that Jinwan subconsciously raised her hand to hold him. Due to the difference in height and weight, she almost lost her balance and fell backward. She hurriedly tried to stand up. "Jingshan." Jinwan hugged Imo Jingshan tightly as he suddenly fell on her. She felt the blood flowing down his back. Earlier, when he suddenly turned around to avoid the bullet, his wound had been aggravated by this movement. Chapter 311. "Mr. Imo, we'll take you back right away. The doctor is already waiting." Feng Ling came quickly and was about to help Jinwan hold him. But Jinwan had already stood firmly. She looked down at him and said clearly, "Imo Jingshan, if anything happens to you, I'll remarry with the child in my belly and let your child call someone else dad." Feng Ling. She suddenly felt it was not appropriate to reach out to help him. The man who fell on Jinwan suddenly chuckled. He leaned against her shoulder and chuckled hoarsely. His voice was so hoarse and weak that it was almost breathless, but it was still full of threat. "How dare you? If anything happens to you, I'll dare to remarry. If you don't believe me, try it." Jinwan resisted the sourness in her nose, hugged him tightly, gave Feng Ling a look, and helped Imo Jingshan into the helicopter with Feng Ling. "I'll call someone to send you back right away. We'll deal with the aftermath." Feng Ling helped Imo Jingshan sit in the helicopter with Jinwan, and then quickly walked out. Seeing the blood on Imo Jingshan's body, Jinwan was about to lift his clothes to have a look, but her hand was held by the man and pulled down. Imo Jingshan sat on the soft chair in the airport, panted, and said without looking back, narrowed his eyes. "What did you say just now? I'm not dead yet and you're thinking of remarrying." It was the first time she had seen Imo Jingshan injured like this. In the past, he had never even had a headache or fever in front of her. Suddenly, he was so weak that she was really afraid that something would happen to him. She was so anxious that she tried to threaten him to hold on. The man suddenly looked at her murderously. "Who do you dare to marry?" Jinwan pursed her lips. "The premise is that you don't die. You have to live well, and keep an eye on me every day. Then I can't run away." She couldn't speak out her emotions. Seeing him injured like this, she couldn't get emotional at all. But she didn't want him to worry too much, so she could only try to calm down. Mo Jingshan looked at her sideways and saw the emotion she had been hiding. I won't die. He raised his hand with some difficulty and stroked her soft hair as usual. I am yours and my life is also yours. I won't let go easily. Don't think too much. Tell Feng Ling that there's no rush to send us back. Defuse the bombs first. Earlier, the landmines around us didn't explode. The people from the base must have found the fuse and cut it off first. Now the danger is mostly gone. Remember to negotiate with the Cambodian local police. There are still many landmines around. Tell them to be careful and not to get too close. Jin Wan listened attentively, nodding as she listened. She would convey the message to Feng Ling later. But his voice was getting softer and softer. In the end, there was only silence. She glanced sideways and saw that Mo Jingshan's eyes were closed. His face was pale, and his body was covered in blood. However, even though he had fainted, his hand still held hers without letting go. The danger in the jungle was finally over. When the helicopter took off, Mo Jingshan had already woken up. It was raining outside the cabin. Although the rain wasn't heavy, it did have a small effect. It delayed the detonation of the newly buried landmines underground, giving them more time to search and clear the mines. Akib and his men were all captured dead or injured. Have the children been sent back? Jinwan asked. Regardless of whether it was Akib's death or Dali's death, this group of evil people could not be treated as humans. Thus, even though she saw this bloody scene, she didn't feel much pity. She only sighed a little. However, the thing that weighed heavily on her heart was the innocent child who had died. Not yet. The base doctor will first treat the children's injuries before sending them back. We don't want to scare their parents, Feng Ling replied. 6 of the children have minor abrasions. One of them was shot in both legs. The bullet pierced through his leg bones. He's destined to be crippled for life. As for the one who was blown up, Feng Ling paused. Every time she was sent out on a dangerous mission, she was used to seeing life and death. However, she still couldn't bear to see innocent children get hurt, especially since the average age of these children was less than 6 years old. The dead can't be brought back to life. We'll think of a way to comfort their parents. We can give them some money or other ways to comfort them. Then leave more money. If the base doesn't have enough money, I can also provide some. I can still afford to help these children grow up, Jinwan said. Feng Ling glanced at her but didn't speak. All of a sudden, Jinwan heard the man who had been resting by her side let out a low chuckle. It was very mild. She turned to look at Mo Jingshan. Why aren't you closing your eyes to rest? What are you laughing about? 11 Base is Nanhang's territory. He's a famous arms dealer in both the black and white worlds. His money is beyond your imagination. There's no need for you to do anything. Mo Jingshan's lips were slightly pale, and his voice was low. Nanhang was not on the plane right now. Jinwan had no choice but to find something to distract herself. Otherwise, if she kept looking at the wound on Mo Jingshan's back, her heart would be in pain. Since he's so powerful, why does it seem like he's under your control? It seems like he doesn't dare to offend you at all. Jinwan moved closer to Mo Jingshan's ear and whispered. She didn't want Feng Ling to hear these words, but Feng Ling's hearing was extremely good. Mo Jingshan's pale, handsome brows only moved slightly. He smiled lightly and didn't say anything. However, Feng Ling directly said, because Nanhang first mingled in the underworld in America. Now that he's able to traverse both the black and white worlds, it's all because of Mr. Mo. Without Mr. Mo's help, it wouldn't be so easy for him to clear his name. You mean that on the path of the underworld, no one can control Nanhang, but on the path of clearing his name, Mo Jingshan is the boss above him. Feng Ling pursed her lips. That's roughly what I mean. In other words, Nanhang is 11 Base's boss and Mo Jingshan is Nanhang's boss. So 11 Base also belongs to Mo Jingshan? You can say that. Jinwan's expression suddenly changed. No wonder that day when I washed the socks, the group of people in your base had such expressions. Everyone knew that she was Mrs. Mo. She suddenly understood their feelings very well. What socks? Mo Jingshan's voice suddenly interrupted Jinwan and Feng Ling's conversation. This was not the first time he heard these words. Mo Jingshan's gaze directly landed on Jinwan's face. Fengling. She suddenly didn't dare to speak anymore. She only used her gaze to look at Jinwan. Jinwan wanted to use this matter to make a joke to ease her feelings, but she turned to look at the blood on the man's body. The scene of blood splattering everywhere from the gunshot earlier was still vivid in her mind. Chapter 312. The people of 11 Base were responsible for sending the children back to the farm. Everyone packed up and prepared to leave Tunnel Sap Lake before dark. Because of Mo Jingshan's injuries and the other injured people's conditions, they had to go to the hospital in the Cambodian capital first, and then return to America the next morning. Jinwan asked if she was going back to America with them. Nanheng only replied that Mo Jingshan was going to America. Shouldn't she go? The answer was of course to go. At this moment, Mo Jingshan sat on a chair in the Cambodian treatment room. The doctors and nurses kept making a fuss. Occasionally, they couldn't help but say a lot because of the severity of the injury on Mo Jingshan's back. As they tended to his wounds, they stared at his incomparably handsome face and kept looking for opportunities to say more. Jinwan couldn't understand what they were talking about. When she saw the female doctor and nurse staring at Mo Jingshan's face and back, her heart instantly felt as though a bottle of vinegar had been poured onto a flame. It was hot and sour. However, she couldn't act up at this moment. Mo Jingshan's injuries were too serious. The doctors were tending to his wounds. She couldn't possibly run over to help him put on a shirt and then take him away from the hospital. However, no matter what the doctors and nurses were saying, and no one knew if Mo Jingshan understood them or not, he just sat there quietly. When Jinwan suddenly got up to go out to take a breath, he stopped her. "Where are you going?" She looked at him. Although the man did not even frown when he was enduring the pain, his forehead was still slightly sweaty. He allowed the nurses to stitch up his wounds with tweezers and needle. Although the veins on the back of his hands were clearly visible, he did not make a sound. He only opened his eyes to look at her. "I'll go get a glass of water," Jinwan said, and went out to find a water dispenser. She would never say that it was because the nurses had been staring at his face and saying a lot of things. They helped him disinfect and leaned down to his shoulder to whisper softly into his ear. This scene almost knocked over her bottle of vinegar. It's not the right time to be jealous, but she doesn't understand their Cambodian language, which makes her even more nervous. She doesn't want them to be careless when treating the wound, so she just goes out for a walk. But Jinwan couldn't go out for too long. Fengling was outside. After chatting with Fengling for a while, she poured a glass of water and went back. Then, he held the cup of water and watched the scene inside. Mo Jingshan's bloodstained shirt was tossed on the ground. His entire body was covered in dust, and there was an indistinct bruise on his brow bone. Because she was finally back. The man raised his eyebrows slightly and looked at her from the corner of his eye. He smiled faintly, as if he had already seen the jealousy in her eyes. He just sat there dirty and disheveled but damn handsome. This was the first time Jinwan realized that a person's good looks did not only come from their clean and presentable appearance. Although Mo Jingshan's appearance was indeed God's most outstanding creation, at this moment, this man's handsomeness was not the faint and noble appearance she was familiar with. Instead, it was the masculinity that flowed from his bones. He did not wear the expensive suit he usually wore, nor did he tidy up his incomparably handsome appearance. But right now his attractiveness was fatal. Thus, it was understandable that these female doctors and nurses would be infatuated with him, under the pretense of treating his wound. The stitching of his wound continued until 9:30 p.m. Mo Jingshan finally put on his clothes. Before taking the plane back to America, everyone took the opportunity to relax and found a decent noodle shop near the hospital. They ordered several bowls of beef noodles to be delivered to the hospital. Because Mo Jingshan's wound had been stitched up, he could not move for the time being. Thus, the task of feeding Boss Missouri food naturally fell onto Jinwan. Jinwan stood before Mo Jingshan. As she stirred the noodles in the bowl, she said, "A few days ago, when I fed you food for the first time, you spilled the soup in the bowl." Mo Jingshan faltered. He could clearly sense that she wanted to settle the score with him later. Under those circumstances, it would only be a problem if I ate it. Although the two of them were well aware of this, he still explained. Jinwan immediately rolled her eyes at him. Then when I fed you water, you should have continued to treat me coldly. Why did you suddenly tease me? Mo Jingshan. Although she said that, Jinwan could not bear to let him starve right now. Right now, he was a heavily injured patient and needed to be taken care of. Mo Jingshan watched as the little woman carefully blew on the slightly hot noodles and then fed it to his mouth. He looked at her and chuckled lightly. You didn't manage to feed me once or twice, so you have to find an opportunity to feed me again, right? Don't tell me you can't even lift your arms and shoulders right now. Jinwan directly pressed the noodles to his lips. The doctor said that before the wound heals, you can't move your shoulders or back. Otherwise, it'll easily tear again. When that happens, it'll be difficult. The man looked at her serious expression and curved his lips. He gave her face and ate the noodles she fed him. Earlier, Jinwan had taken a few bites from the other bowl. The Cambodian people's taste was different from that in China. Although this noodle soup was made by a very good noodle restaurant near the hospital, she didn't like the taste in the noodle soup. It was sour but not sweet, and it was salty. In short, she just couldn't get used to it. Thankfully, the broth was clean, and the noodles were relatively soft. Noodles nourished the stomach and were easy to digest. It was suitable for people who were temporarily injured and could not move around much. Thus, she had to think of a way to let him eat more. After the meal, the people from the base were already preparing to board the plane. Jinwan went to help with the luggage. Mo Jingshan did not stay idle either. He chatted with Nanheng and Officer Ents for a long time. When Jinwan went to look for him again, she happened to see an extremely bright light outside the helicopter, casting a dazzling glow on his body. His expression was serene, as though nothing he had experienced in the past few days could disturb his calm and steady footsteps. She didn't know what Officer Ents had said to him, but he did not say a word. Only a hint of coldness appeared in his brows. Seeing that Jinwan had come over, Mo Jingshan listened to the doctor's advice and did not move. He only used his eyes to indicate for her to come over. Jinwan quickly approached him and stood in front of him. The lights fell on their bodies, and their shadows intertwined. Cambodia's winter was stifling and hot for many days. Tonight it finally felt cooler. Jinwan faced the direction of Tunnel Sap Lake. Cambodia's night sky was silent. Only the bright stars twinkled. This country was very beautiful. Chapter 313. They finally set off for America. There were only 4 people on this plane: Jinwan, Feng Ling, Nanheng and Mo Jingshan. Nanheng was covered in the smell of cigarettes. He had just extinguished a cigarette before boarding the plane. Recently, he had smoked more than usual. Feng Ling sat slightly further away from them. She sat in the seat in front, separated from the driver's seat, and chatted with Jinwan occasionally. Compared to the 2 women's voices, the 2 men in the cabin were much quieter. Nanheng calmly leaned against the seat, folding his arms like a master. He closed his eyes and prepared to sleep. Mo Jingshan turned his body. He could not move around frequently for the time being, so he lazily leaned against the window of the cabin and looked outside. The man's eyelashes cast a gentle shadow on his face. Jinwan almost forgot the thrill she had just experienced. She almost thought that she had just returned from a tropical country, with Great Boss Missouri on a vacation, and was on the return flight. This man always made people feel at ease. A sense of security, belonging and stability. Everything came from him. Jinwan did not know when she had fallen asleep. When she woke up, her head was heavy. She could still hear the sound of the propeller by her ears. She was still on the plane, so she must not have slept for long. However, the dazzling light from the window indicated that they had already flown across half the world. In just a few hours of flight, they had passed through day and night. Originally, she had been feeling uncomfortable because of her morning sickness and other pregnancy symptoms, especially after flying for such a long time. However, right now she felt especially comfortable lying down. She came to her senses under the glaring light and came to her senses. She was lying on Imo Jingshan's lap. He was still injured. Jinwan rushed to climb up and turned to see the man's gaze landing on her face. Imo Jingshan pushed her slightly messy hair behind her ear, gently asking, "Why didn't you sleep a little longer? You're injured, yet you're letting me lean on you. Your body is already stiff and uncomfortable when you can't move. Now that you're carrying my weight, you should have woken me up," Jinwan said as she rushed to check the wound on his back. However, there was no more blood seeping out of his clothes. She sighed in relief. "I only suffered some superficial wounds on my back. It's not like I can't touch my whole body." Imo Jingshan was about to reach out to pick up the blanket that had fallen off her body. She was afraid that he would pull his mouth, so she pressed his hand down and turned to pick up the blanket herself. At this moment, the cabin was a little quiet. They didn't know if Nan Hung was really asleep or just taking a nap. Even if he heard the sound, he probably couldn't be bothered to care. Feng Ling hadn't slept, but she didn't speak either. She leaned against the wall of the cabin and didn't speak. No one knew what she was thinking. Jinwan lowered her voice. "Feng Ling, aren't you going to sleep? We're almost there. Mrs. Mo, you haven't had much rest these days. Pregnant people like to sleep and get tired easily. It's not good for you to stay with us like this. After we arrive in America, go to the hospital to have a good checkup." Previously, when they were in the Cambodian hospital, there were many injured people who needed urgent treatment. However, they didn't trust the hospital there, so they didn't let Jinwan go for a checkup. Now that they were about to land in America, it was better for her to go for a checkup. "I understand. I'll find some time to go take a look." Jinwan didn't want to cause trouble for them, nor did she want them to worry, so she directly agreed. However, when she heard that they were about to arrive, she subconsciously glanced outside. She could only see the American sky and the warm and dazzling setting sun, shining brightly. It had been many years since she came to America. Her expression was dazed for a moment before she suddenly asked, "Are we going to 11 base? Or are we going to Officer Ince's place? Or, we'll stop at the temporary airport in Los Angeles first. Our people will negotiate with Officer Ince's men. You and Mr. Imo must be sent to the hospital immediately. His wound is deep, and the wound on his head isn't light either. He still needs a series of examinations and follow-up treatment. Your body also needs a further examination. You don't have to worry about anything else. Rest in the hospital. This is no longer Cambodia. There won't be so many scary things nearby. Just relax." As Feng Ling spoke, she glanced at the time again. "We'll probably land in half an hour. Mrs. Mo, if you feel any discomfort, let me know. I'll have them land as slowly as possible." "I'm fine. I can land normally." But Los Angeles, it was actually Los Angeles. That was right. If not Los Angeles, where else could she go? The Mo family's company, Shine Group, was here. 11 Base was also in the suburbs of Los Angeles. She had also studied abroad in Los Angeles. To Jinwan, this place could be considered familiar. However, many years had truly passed. Including the 10 years in her previous life, she had crossed over even more years. There were many things that she could not remember clearly when she was young and ignorant. She suddenly felt a warmth in her hand. She turned to see Imo Jingshan's hand holding her, imprisoning her in his palm. As the plane was about to land, it slowly descended and passed by the Los Angeles River. The ancient bridge on First Street above the river was an important hub for entering and exiting Los Angeles. Jinwan looked down at the Los Angeles River. She suddenly heard Imo Jingshan's voice by her ear. "When you were studying in America, did you often come to the Los Angeles River?" She did not understand why he would suddenly ask this question. After thinking for a long time, she finally said, "My school was very far from here, so I rarely came to Los Angeles. However, there were a few times when I went out for gatherings with friends and classmates. At night, when I was bored, I would take a walk by the river. I did come here. At that time, I seemed to have gotten separated from them. In the middle of the night, the streetlights by the river were broken. That night was especially dark." Speaking up to here, Jinwan's eyes brightened. She seemed to have recalled something. "That's right, at that time, I also saved someone from the river. That person was covered in blood. I don't know how he was injured. If I hadn't been quick enough to catch him, he would have been washed downstream. Downstream is a waterfall. It's quite dangerous." Her voice had yet to land when she suddenly felt the man's gaze fixed on her. Jinwan choked. Her eyes met his, and a memory that she had hidden for a long time and did not place in her heart suddenly leaped up. The difference between mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and a first kiss. She was stunned for a while before she raised her head abruptly and met the man's smiling eyes in disbelief. Chapter 314. Before she could ask more questions, the plane had already landed. The cabin door was quickly opened. Feng Ling picked up her cell phone and called someone, but in an instant, many people had gathered outside the plane. Even after getting off the plane, Mo Jingshan did not let go of Jinwan's hand. Jinwan did not have a chance to ask him again, and the two of them were pushed by a group of people to the hospital. The wound on Mo Jingshan's back was not well treated in the Cambodian hospital. The doctor arranged a special passage for him, and he went for surgery as soon as he arrived. The surgery lasted from 6:30 p.m. to 10 p.m. American time. Because of the general anesthesia, Mo Jingshan did not wake up for the whole night. The police and the people from the base left after the surgery. After making sure that Mo Jingshan's wound was completely fine, Nan Hung was persuaded by Jinwan to return to the base. Jinwan was supposed to stay in the ward to take care of him, but because he had just had an operation, Mo Jingshan needed to rest in the sterile ward tonight and would not be allowed in until tomorrow morning. She couldn't go in now, so she stood outside the ward and looked at the man's pale but still handsome face through the huge glass window. Her mind kept replaying the scene of Mo Jingshan looking at her before the plane landed. Was it him? The man covered in blood. The man she accidentally saved by the Los Angeles River. Was it Mo Jingshan? Feng Ling went out to buy some daily necessities Jinwan needed. When she came back, she saw Jinwan leaning against the glass window and went up to persuade her. She said that Mr. Mo had recovered a lot and needed to sleep for a day because of the anesthesia. He would be fine when he woke up tomorrow. She then took her to the OB/GYN department for a checkup. After the checkup, Jinwan's physical condition was good. There was no problem, but she had been emotionally unstable these days. In China's words, the fetus had been affected and was not very stable. She needed to rest in bed for a few days. The burns on her hands also needed to be properly treated, so she arranged a comfortable ward on another floor for Jinwan, so that she could rest and accompany Mo Jingshan here. It wasn't easy for him to be able to lie down on a bed with peace of mind. There were no longer gunshots or explosions ringing in his ears, and there was no longer any threat to his life. However, Jinwan suddenly could not sleep. After tossing and turning for a long time, she picked up her phone and saw that Xia Tian had called her a day ago, as well as a few text messages. "Where is he? Why aren't you picking up the phone? I'm not planning to come back yet. Cambodia doesn't even have any local specialties. How could it be worth your time? Come back quickly, there are hundreds of millions of orders waiting for you, Boss G." As soon as Jinwan returned to High City, she went to Cambodia. She only took the time to call Xia Tian and said that she was going to Cambodia for a vacation. Xia Tian thought that she was under too much pressure from studying in T-City and allowed her to come out and play happily. This so-called vacation was really an unforgettable experience. Jinwan smiled and called Xia Tian back. It was night in Los Angeles, but it was already morning in China. Xia Tian was in a meeting in the studio. After Jinwan briefly told her about her schedule, Xia Tian hurriedly said that she was in a meeting and directly hung up. She put down her phone and lay back on the bed. She picked up the ultrasound test report by the bedside and looked at the small blurry image on it. Earlier, when she went for a checkup, the doctor said that the cute oval dot in the middle was what the baby looked like when it was still an embryo. After staring at it for a long time, Jinwan's gradually settled heart gradually calmed down, and she finally felt a little sleepy. However, she did not sleep for long. After sleeping for only a few hours, she suddenly woke up with a start. In the dream, Mo Jingshan was covered in blood. In that small wooden house, Dolly had a gun pointed at his forehead. Jinwan rushed in as though she had gone mad. The moment the gunshot rang out, she screamed hoarsely, but she could not make a single sound. She could only watch as blood splattered everywhere. She did not even see how Imo Jingshan had fallen after being shot. She only saw the ground covered in fresh blood. The warm blood seemed to have flowed to her feet. She was shocked to the point of breaking out in a cold sweat. She abruptly opened her eyes and sat up. Her nose was filled with the smell of disinfectant. This was a ward in a hospital in Los Angeles. It was white and quiet. There was no Dolly, no gun, and no blood. Jinwan closed her eyes, raised her hand to rub her sweaty temples, and let out a long sigh of relief. Fortunately, it was just a dream. Jinwan lifted the quilt and got out of bed. She was wearing a brand new light blue hospital gown, which was very soft and comfortable. There were 2 delicate bags on the sofa in the ward, which were the clothes Feng Ling had bought for her before she left. As for the clothes she wore in Cambodia, of course, they were all thrown away, leaving no trace. Her dream was full of scenes of Imo Jingshan being injured. Jinwan really could not sleep. Although she had taken a shower before going to bed, she still habitually took a shower to relieve her stress. She went directly into the small bathroom in this luxurious single ward. When she came out of the bathroom, the sky outside the window was already white, and it was already 6 o'clock in the morning. Last night, the doctor said that she could only enter Imo Jingshan's ward after 6 o'clock. She took a look at the time, quickly dried her hair, combed it back with her fingers and walked out. Early in the morning, Los Angeles, like High City, was invaded by the cold winter air. Even though the hospital corridor was air-conditioned, at this time of day, the cold weather in the empty corridor made people feel cold to the bone. Jinwan got the doctor's permission, gently opened the door of the ward, and walked in with the help of the faint light in the ward. The curtains of this ward were closed, and it was very quiet. It was so quiet that she could hear the sound of a man's breathing. She walked to the bed. The light in the ward was not very bright. It was a relatively mild kind of cold light, but it was enough to clearly see the outline of the man's face, although it was half dark and not very clear. He was much paler and thinner than when he was in China. There was a light bruise on his chin, and the not-so-obvious bruise on his brow bone had not faded, but he was still incomparably handsome. In the bustling city of the United States, by the Los Angeles River, the young man lay upright on the white bed, sleeping deeply. His face was calm, and his hands were placed on both sides of the quilt. There were also bloodstains on the back of his hands that had been treated with medicine. He was lying there alive and well. Outside the ward window, the dawn of the morning was gradually rising. He lay here quietly, and the faint light fell on his face. Chapter 315. Imo Jingshan. Imo Jingshan. Muttering his name in her heart, Jinwan leaned down. Her soft lips kissed the bruise on his brows, his eyes, his high nose, and finally the man's light lips. However, she did not dare to kiss too hard. She only touched his lips, and was about to get up. However, just as she was about to move away, the man's eyes, which had been quietly closed, slowly opened at this moment. When her lips were a few inches away from his light-colored thin lips moved slightly. Being kissed awake by you early in the morning, is this my reward for returning safely with all 4 limbs intact? The man's voice was low and hoarse, but each word struck her heart. Jinwan's expression turned awkward, but she did not move away. She looked at the man's face so close to her, and stared at his slightly drowsy eyes that were as dark as the deep sea. When did you wake up? Imo Jingshan looked at her and chuckled softly. I just woke up. It's only 6 o'clock now. The doctor said that the effects of the anesthesia would only subside after more than 10 hours. Why are you awake now? The little woman leaning against the side of the ward was much thinner than when she was in T-City. Her chin was much sharper, and there were obvious dark circles around her eyes, a sign that she did not sleep well. Even though the lights were not too bright, her expression could not be hidden. He raised his brows slightly, speaking hoarsely. Not to mention that it's already been 10 hours. Even if I had just been injected with anesthesia, I would still wake up if you kissed me like this. Jinwan smiled, and was about to bring a chair over to sit by the bed to accompany him and take care of him. However, just as she was about to take the chair, she suddenly heard Mo Jingxian say, "Don't sit. Come over, lie down." Jin Wan heard him move slightly, as though he was about to give up half of the bed to her. She rushed to turn her head. "Don't move. Your wound has already been repeatedly injured several times. Now that the surgery is finally over, you have to rest quietly. You can't move for the next few days. The dark circles under your eyes are so big that you can't hide them. You came here at 6 o'clock. Do you think you're an immortal who doesn't need to sleep and rest?" The man's tone was tainted with some of his usual instigation, and his eyes signaled her to come over. Jin Wan could only walk back to the bed and sit down. "I've slept. It's just that what I've seen and heard these past few days was too intense. I have nightmares, and I might need some time to recover." "Are you still talking about me? You didn't eat or drink for a few days, didn't you?" "I just slept a little less. How am I a god?" Mo Jingxian ignored her sophistry. He clearly understood the changes in Jin Wan's heart. She needed time to recover from the shock, and he couldn't just stand there and watch her be scared. "It's still early. You need to rest too. You'll have nightmares if you sleep alone. Just sleep here, okay?" He laid flat and didn't move as she said. His voice was patient and gentle as he coaxed her to lie down with him. Although this was a single bed, it was slightly larger than the beds in ordinary hospitals. If Jin Wan really lay down, there would be more than enough space. There was only him under the blanket. She sat on the edge of the bed, looked at the sky outside the window, and then glanced at Mo Jingxian. "Then promise you won't move. If something happens to your stitched back because of me, I'll never come to your ward to accompany you again." The man seemed to chuckle. It was a light chuckle that came from his chest. He didn't expose her thoughts of wanting to lie down, but was too embarrassed to do so. He only answered, "N." Jin Wan took a corner of the blanket, lifted it, and lay down on her side. Mo Jingxian's hand held hers, but Jin Wan carefully slapped his hand away. "You said you won't move. Not even your hand." Mo Jingxian's voice was by her ears. "No, if your fingers move, your finger bones will move. If your finger bones move, your arm will move, then your shoulder, and then your back, head, and neck. You can't move at all," Jin Wan said as she carefully lay down as if facing a formidable enemy. She didn't dare to touch him. She didn't expect that one day when she slept by Mo Jingxian's side, she didn't even dare to touch him. "How weak do you think I am? How can my back be injured when I hold your hand?" When he said this, it was clearly a calm statement, but it sounded like a tease. It even seemed to contain the grievance of wanting to hold his wife, but not being able to. Jin Wan lay flat and looked at the incandescent crystal lights on the ceiling. She sighed that not only was this hospital's medical standards excellent, but even this special ward was luxuriously decorated. If it weren't for the fact that the color was close to white, if it weren't for this white bed, it would be comparable to a 5-star hotel. In order not to let his wound be affected again, she simply turned over on the bed and faced him. "I'll watch you sleep like this, okay? If you watch me like this, how can I sleep?" The man said with a faint smile. "Jin Wan, do I affect you like this? Then I'll go back to my own ward?" He paused, slowly withdrew his hand that was about to hold her hand, and said meticulously, "You'd better lie here." His next words, "You're easily frightened when you have nightmares. I can comfort you whenever I'm here." Jin Wan was silent for 2 seconds. "Did I often have nightmares before?" Mo Jingxian suddenly glanced at her. "Can your memory be any worse? A few months ago, you had a fever and begged me not to leave. You trembled all over and couldn't wake up from the nightmare. Don't you remember? It seemed that there was such a thing. It seems that I haven't had those nightmares for a long time." She leaned against his side, carefully pressed her face against his uninjured shoulder, and spoke in a low voice. Mo Jingxian gazed at her for 2 seconds. "Sleep. I'm here." "Okay." Even though he couldn't move, he still slowly put his hand on hers under the quilt. There are not only peaceful countries in this world. As long as you want to experience it, you can find a country more chaotic than Cambodia at any time. What you see and hear in a war-torn country will only be more tragic than those. Take some time to watch more news about the war, and you won't have nightmares about the death of these fugitives. That blood is what they deserve, and they lost their lives. Human life is indeed very fragile. Living in a peaceful world, you should cherish this peace. Okay. Jinwan knew that he was counseling her. She had heard that many people who left war-torn countries, or some special disaster sites, would go to a psychologist for counseling. So some people could never walk out of the bloody shadow of death. Her heart was not so fragile. Chapter 316. On the same bed, she turned her body slightly, but she was afraid that her movements would affect his wound. So even if she moved a little, she was very careful. It felt like the two of them had become one. His pain was her pain, and his wound was her wound. Just now the hospital corridor was a little cold, but the ward was very warm. Jinwan was covered with the quilt. Her hair, which had just been showered, was still wet and pressed against her head. She pulled the quilt slightly, stretched out her arms, and carefully spread her hair out, no longer using it as a pillow. Through the dim light in the ward, Mo Jingshan saw the burns on the backs of her hands. The light blue hospital gown covered the wounds near her wrists, and the white gauze wrapped around the backs of her hands again and again. Nanheng knows a lot of friends and doctors who often go through fire and water. I asked him to get some medicine that can remove burn scars. You can apply it every day, he said in a low voice. He sounded calm, but there was a hint of heartache in his tone. Jinwan glanced at her hand and smiled. I'm fine. It's just that the top layer of skin was scalded and had a lot of blisters. Then I added some herbal ash to it, so it looks very serious. Yesterday, when the doctor here applied medicine on my wound, a layer of scalded skin had fallen off. The skin and flesh inside are not seriously scalded, but it may turn red for a while. I'll be fine after resting for a while. It was good enough that she could leave that place alive. If she didn't even have a scar, then what she had experienced might just be a fairy tale. Anyway, it was just a layer of skin that was scalded, and it would heal after a long time. It was not a deep scar. Mo Jingshan withdrew his gaze and held her hand under the quilt. Jinwan reminded him, just hold it gently. Don't use too much force. You'll hurt your arm and shoulder blades. I know, he said flatly. Obviously, he was a little upset that she had scalded herself. But it was true that he was not a delicate man, and she was not a delicate woman. Some traces left behind proved that they had indeed gone through fire and water together. Such traces were more meaningful than any wedding ring, gift, or souvenir. Mo Jingshan was obviously still under the effect of the anesthetic. He closed his eyes tiredly. Jinwan lay beside him and changed the topic, wanting him to rest peacefully. Why did you ask me if I often went to the Los Angeles River? Did I ask? You clearly asked me when the plane landed yesterday. That should be it. He even anesthetized his head during a surgery? You even forgot what you asked me yesterday. Did you forget a lot of things when you didn't have surgery? Jinwan was exasperated. So when I was 16, the night I was separated from my friend, because the streetlights around us were broken, the person I fished up from the Los Angeles River was you? Mo Jingshan smiled. It seemed like she didn't lose her memory. She just didn't realize that she had unintentionally done a good deed and saved his life, so she didn't take it to heart. He closed his eyes and tightened his grip on her fingertips. I was more seriously injured than I am now. 11 Base's helicopter exploded a kilometer above the Los Angeles River, and I fell into the river. If it weren't for you, I would have been swept into the waterfall downstream, and there would be no Mo Jingshan in this world. It was, really, she had just experienced all this in Cambodia, so she was not too surprised by what he said. She was just curious. She suddenly turned her head to look at the man's face so close to her. At that time, the streetlights were broken, and it was dark around the river. She only noticed that there seemed to be a lot of blood on his body, perhaps because she had watched too many American sci-fi war movies. She was still young, and had a little heroic feeling, so she wanted to save him. At that time, because she was young and bold, she didn't feel scared when she saw so much blood on his body, but she didn't see his face clearly. Later, when her separated friend called to urge her to go to the bridge to go back to school with him, she carefully helped him to a safe place on the shore. And before he woke up, she ran away in a hurry. But she didn't expect that person to be Mo Jingshan. For Jinwan, those memories were 10 years away, so it was really a long time ago to think about it. So, it was you who arranged the marriage between the Mo family and the Ji family? You didn't do it to repay me, did you? Jinwan's voice suddenly became bitter. Tut, please don't do it to repay me. She didn't like it. Mo Jingshan smiled. No, there are many ways to repay me. I don't have to sell myself. Jinwan. Sell herself? Wasn't this equivalent to being openly despised by Mo Jingshan? The marriage was indeed grandfather's proposal, but the choice was mine. At first, because I knew it was you, I just paid more attention to you. But the real reason for the marriage had nothing to do with repayment. Then what's the reason? The man glanced at her. Are you sure you want me, a patient, to lie here and tell you so much? Just this one. I suddenly feel very sleepy. Can't I just say this one? I can't fall asleep if you keep doing this. I'm really sleepy. In the past, it was fine if she didn't know about it. But now that she suddenly had so many connections, Jinwan's curiosity was piqued. However, he held back and didn't continue. Can't you make it short? The man didn't speak anymore, just gently held her fingers with his palm, stroked the gauze wrapped around the back of her hand, and closed his eyes as if he was really falling asleep. Jinwan wanted to ask more, but he had just had an operation last night, and was woken up early in the morning by her. Her lips moved. Although she was unwilling, she closed her mouth and didn't disturb him anymore. She lay beside him and looked at the man. Finally, Mo Jingshan really fell asleep. She could see how much energy he had put into talking with her for so long. But she had to admit that the fear in her heart caused by the encounter a few days ago was really taken away. At this moment, except for the question marks and curiosity in her head, everything else seemed to have been squeezed out, and the feeling of panic was gone. She stared at him for a while before she gradually felt sleepy. She slowly withdrew her hand from his palm and gently placed it on his chest, feeling his steady heartbeat. Beat after beat, it seemed to pass through the gauze in her palm and spread from her hand to her limbs and bones. It warmed her blood and nerves, allowing her to completely find the long-lost sense of security. Chapter 317. Los Angeles Hospital. At 8 o'clock in the morning, Nan Heng and Feng Ling got out of the black SUV. Feng Ling went straight to Jinwan's ward without saying a word. Nan Heng stood there, glanced at her back, raised his eyebrows, and smoked a cigarette at the door of the hospital before going in. However, when he was about to go to Mo Jingshan's ward, Feng Ling suddenly came over with a dark face. Nan Heng glanced at her and heard the short-haired woman say, Mrs. Mo is missing. Missing? Our men are guarding outside the hospital. How could she go out without a sound? I'll go look for her. Wait, don't rush, Nan Heng said, and pushed the door open to enter Mo Jingshan's ward. However, as soon as he stepped in, he suddenly paused and took a step back. He half closed the door of the ward and turned to look at Feng Ling, who had yet to see clearly and had a strange look on her face. As if to make sure he didn't see wrong, Nan Heng hesitated for 2 seconds before he pushed the door open and glanced at the bed. Sure enough, he saw Jinwan and Mo Jingshan lying in the same bed. Don't look for her, Nan Heng sneered and signaled Feng Ling to look inside. Feng Ling glanced inside, and her expression froze. She saw Jinwan lying on her side carefully beside Mo Jingshan, her hand pressed against Mo Jingshan's chest through the quilt. Although Mo Jingshan was sleeping on his back, he looked particularly calm and warm. She probably came here as soon as the lockdown was lifted this morning. Nan Heng glanced at the scene inside with a playful expression, and was about to close the door and leave so as not to disturb the little couple's sleep. However, at this time, the man sleeping in the bed opened his eyes and glanced at the door. Jinwan didn't sleep very well. Hearing the conversation outside the door, she woke up and looked at the door almost at the same time as Mo Jingshan. When she met Feng Ling's and Nan Heng's eyes, Jinwan was still a little sleepy and dazed. After 2 or 3 seconds, She sat up and almost forgot that there was an injured man beside her who couldn't move. The moment her hand pressed against Jingxin's arm, she hurriedly withdrew it, looked at the door, and then at the man who was still very calm when he woke up. On the contrary, it was as if she had been caught red-handed in bed. She could have slept by herself, but she ran to her husband's ward and slept on the same bed as him. It was really awkward. Seeing that they were awake, Nanheng smiled and pushed the door open. Feng Ling stood outside the door, hesitated, and then turned to walk out with the phone. You came at 6? Nanheng took a look at Jinwan. I didn't sleep well last night and woke up very early, so I came over at 6 o'clock. Jinwan was about to get off the bed when her hand was held by the man on the bed. Don't mind him. Go to sleep. Jingxin's tone was mild and calm. Jinwan. Her legs, which were about to get off the bed, immediately shrank back. Jingxin's bed was so warm. Of course, she couldn't bear to leave. However, although Nanheng didn't say much, when he approached the bed, the look he gave them clearly indicated that he was complaining about the two of them showing off their affection. Weighing between being shameless and being shameless, Jinwan finally compromised and sat on his bed, not getting off. Jinwan tugged the blanket closer to her body, and then calmly looked at Nanheng, who was about to reach for a glass of water with one hand and his phone with the other. His expression was confused and silent, and he was looking at the two of them with great displeasure. At this moment, Jinwan felt deeply ashamed of herself for showing off their affection, so she snuggled under the quilt again, trying to make Nanheng focus his attention on Jingxin. I just King came to visit the patient. Nanheng picked up the glass of water and turned to fill it. After drinking half a glass with an ugly expression, he turned to see that Jinwan had almost snuggled into Jingxin's arms. Nanheng. This time, it was not Jinwan who wanted to lie down, but Jingxin saw that 2 buttons of her hospital gown were accidentally undone when she slept, revealing a small part of her collarbone and skin, and signaled her to lie down and cover herself with the quilt with his eyes. When she finally lay down again, Jinwan turned her face away, trying not to look at Nanheng's expression, but Jingxin held her hand very firmly and had no intention of letting go. Although their hands were both under the quilt, from the outside of the quilt, they could tell what was going on. Jinwan raised her head and mouthed to him, "Let go of me first." Jingxin glanced at her cheeks and bright eyes that were a little tight because of embarrassment. His lips curved beautifully, and he mouthed to her, "No, Jinwan." Because he was injured, she didn't dare to push or struggle away from his hand too hard. At this time, Nanheng glanced out of the door of the ward. Seeing that Feng Ling was nowhere to be seen, his face darkened. Hearing the sound of the cup being slammed down, the two of them paused and looked at Nanheng at the same time. Nanheng resisted the urge to smash the cup on Jingxin's face and said coldly, "You too be careful. For the sake of the stability of the baby in her belly, you'd better be a vegetarian in the first 3 months of pregnancy, and try to restrain yourself after 3 months." "I just came to see him and took a nap," Jinwan explained. "Well, I'll restrain myself," Jingxin answered flatly. "Restrain?" Jinwan was speechless. Restrain? He just took a nap. Why did it sound like he had done something like that just now? She was still a pregnant woman. 10 minutes later, Feng Ling came in with several breakfasts. "Are you all awake?" The short-haired woman didn't even look at Nanheng and took the breakfasts in her hand to the bedside. "I think you haven't eaten anything yet. Mrs. Mo is now in the period of morning sickness, so I think the nutritious meals in the hospital are not very good. I went to a nearby Chinese restaurant to buy some Chinese breakfast, porridge and fried dough sticks. Is that okay?" Before Jinwan and Jingxin spoke, Nanheng had walked over. Yes. He had just reached out to take his share when Feng Ling picked it up, opened the plastic lid, and put it on the table by the bedside. "Mrs. Mo, you eat first." Nanheng. After the breakfasts were distributed, Feng Ling saw Jinwan come over in only the hospital gown, so she turned to go out and went back to her ward to fetch a coat for Jinwan. Chapter 318. Nanheng sat on the sofa not far from the bed, opened the plastic bowl, and ate a few mouthfuls of porridge. He did not answer Mo Jingshan's question, but thought of the picture of Jin Wan lying next to Mo Jingshan, and then the picture of Feng Ling, not even bothering to look at him. He felt that this bowl of porridge tasted like dog food in his mouth. In fact, Feng Ling is a very delicate person, but she is too good at hiding her emotions. As Jin Wan fed Mo Jingshan breakfast, she said softly, "I've been in contact with her for so long. Although she's cold and distant most of the time, it's just that the protective layer around her is too thick." As she spoke, she blew gently on the bowl, and then fed Mo Jingshan a mouthful of porridge, asking with concern, "Is it still hot?" Seeing Jin Wan carefully fearing that he would be scalded, the smile on Mo Jingshan's lips grew clearer. Just now, the head of the bed had swayed a little, and he was now sitting on his stomach. Compared with Nanheng's cold face, his face was like a spring breeze. Nanheng really felt that he couldn't eat breakfast anymore. "I'm afraid you still don't know how he married you?" Nanheng said with a snort. Jin Wan glanced at him and replied, "Do you mean that I saved him by the Los Angeles River a few years ago, or something else?" Nanheng's cold brows moved, and he was a little surprised. "You know," Mo Jingshan said lightly, "there's no need to hide it." Nanheng looked at Jin Wan and smiled. "Aren't you afraid that he married you to repay a debt of gratitude?" Jin Wan. He said no. Mo Jingshan glanced at him coldly. "You can't control your own woman, and can't bear to see me live a peaceful life, so you want to take the opportunity to sow discord?" Nanheng sneered, leaned back on the sofa like a master, and casually put his hands on the back of the sofa. Looking at the two people on the sickbed, one feeding and the other eating, he sneered and said, "What do you like about this once arrogant and domineering first miss? What's so cute that you CEO Mo are willing to tie the rest of your life to her?" This was a good question. Jin Wan had wanted to ask that earlier. Mo Jingshan did not even think about it. He gently pressed down the spoon that Jin Wan had just brought to his mouth, chuckling softly. A 16-year-old girl pouting her lips and blowing air at me without any rhyme or reason. As she blew, she said that this was her first kiss. Isn't that cute enough? Jin Wan, can you not mention this matter again? From the perspective of her age, he was clearly a F***king retard. Nanheng rolled his eyes. Is this F***king cute? Mo Jingshan's elegant and deep brows rose slightly as he calmly said, "At High City's banquet, the way she hid in a corner to avoid the crowd in order to secretly drink a few glasses of wine was especially cute." When she heard that they were going to get married, she stopped her father's car on the street and argued that she wouldn't marry anyone she didn't love was especially cute. In order to escape from the wedding, she used a pair of scissors to poke 10 to 20 holes in her dress was especially cute. At the wedding, she purposely bent her fingers and declared that her fingers were crippled and couldn't wear the wedding ring was especially cute. After the wedding, she was so angry that she refused to throw the bouquet and hid backstage to vent her anger on the flower petals. Jin Wan. She suddenly wanted to find a hole to hide in. Nanheng expressionlessly said, "I'm just asking casually." Mo Jingshan said seriously, "I can count a few more." Nanheng remained expressionless. "Save it for when your wife is 3 months pregnant. Go back to your bedroom and count them." Mo Jingshan looked at him with pity. "Didn't you want to hear it just now?" Nanheng remained expressionless. "I'm about to throw up from the few mouthfuls of porridge I just ate. Don't talk about it. Thank you." Seeing that this topic had come to an end, Jin Wan tested the temperature of the porridge in the bowl, scooped a spoonful, and brought it to Mo Jingshan's mouth. When the man looked at her, she pursed her lips and said with a hot face, "No wonder the Mo family flew a new wedding dress from France right after I destroyed it. So you saw it." Mo Jingshan immediately smiled. Mo Jingshan chuckled softly. "Are the flower petals delicious?" Jin Wan sighed. She held the bowl in one hand and covered her face with the other, looking as if she couldn't bear the memory of her stupid behavior. After a long time, she put down her hand and tried to feed him the porridge calmly, lest she accidentally spilled it on him. "What else do you want to ask?" Mo Jingshan raised his lips and took a look at Nanheng. At the same time, He slowly raised his hand and pushed a strand of hair from Jinwan's cheek behind her ear. Jinwan hurriedly turned her head slightly to avoid his hand. Don't move your hand. Mo Jingshan smiled and put down his hand. Nanheng waved his hand on the sofa, looking as if his heart had been devastated 10 times. I've been your brother for so many years, but you haven't even praised me once. Did this woman blow a breath of fairy air to you? Is she King beautiful when she drinks wine and eats petals? The corner of Jinwan's mouth twitched. She didn't care about fairy air. But her behavior was really seen by Mo Jingshan. She really wanted to disappear on the spot. She was going to lose face. Before she fled, Nanheng answered a phone call and left. Jinwan continued to feed him porridge, and Mo Jingshan continued to eat cooperatively. The ward was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Only the little woman's embarrassed expression didn't match the silence. Mo Jingshan took a look at her. Jinwan also took a look at him, then put down the bowl and cleared her throat. What you just said is true. Then, what on earth do you like about me? Mo Jingshan looked at the porridge that she had taken away and lowered his eyes to think. You can also understand that I'm bewitched by your beauty. Jinwan resisted the urge to roll her eyes. There are so many beautiful women out there. Even a small celebrity from the entertainment circle would have a certain level of beauty. Do you have to describe yourself as so shallow? The man smiled. Who told you to be so beautiful? Jinwan's heart was trembling from his smile. She couldn't talk to him anymore. She really couldn't talk to him anymore. She really couldn't flirt with him anymore. Jinwan's first reaction was to blush, and her heart beat faster. She really couldn't stand this big boss who was said to be cold and unapproachable to be flirting with her seriously. After a few seconds, she calmed down a little. My reason tells me that what you've seen and heard about me must be more than that. When on earth did you find out that I was that person? At that time, the street lamp was broken, and I couldn't see clearly, let alone you who couldn't even open your eyes. Chapter 319. Jinwan. Mo Jingshan's smile faded. My life is yours. My body and mind are also yours. If you dare to abandon me now, won't your conscience hurt? Jinwan. She abruptly put down the bowl of porridge, pulled up the blanket on the bed, and covered his face. The man's body couldn't move, so she covered his face and head. After maintaining this position with the blanket for a full 5 seconds, she was the first to give in and tugged the blanket down with a pained expression. Jinwan's face was cold, and she said seriously, Get well first. If you get hurt like this again in the future, I'll really abandon you. The man smiled and didn't provoke her anymore. He pointed to the porridge she put on the table. What? Continue to feed me. For the rest of the day, many of the little brothers of 11 Base came to the hospital to visit behind Nanheng and Feng Ling's back. But not everyone could enter Mo Jingshan's ward, not even the people of 11 Base. Jinwan received the call and went down to pick up those little brothers. When Nanheng suddenly came back and glared at them, the little brothers expressed their sympathy and prepared to leave dejectedly. Before leaving, one of them suddenly said with emotion, Mr. Mo, I wish you good health and a happy married life, because Mrs. Mo is really a good person. Mo Jingshan, who sat quietly on the bed, was not affected by the liveliness here at all. His handsome face was calm, but he raised his eyebrows because of these words. The little brother pointed in the direction of the distant Cambodia. Previously, when we were in Cambodia, Mrs. Mo not only cooked for us, cleaned the house, but also washed our socks. We've been single for more than 20 years, and it was the first time a woman washed our socks. I couldn't bear to wear them. The moment Mo Jingshan heard this, Nanheng directly kicked his butt and chased them out. Get out. They left, and the ward was quiet for a moment. Mo Jingshan turned his eyes to Jinwan. Wash socks. Who ordered you to do it? Without waiting for Jinwan to answer, he turned his eyes to Nanheng. Don't look at me. I don't even believe that eldest Miss Ji can cook. How could I let her do this? Nanheng felt that it was necessary to make those brats run 50 laps around the base after they returned. She's too worried about your safety. She's afraid that she'll let her imagination run wild and find something to do. Jinwan coughed. I did do it myself. There's no need to mention this kind of thing. Just now they were just joking. In fact, I didn't wash many pairs. I was just doing it out of courtesy. Otherwise I'll feel bad if I eat, live, and be protected by them. Nanheng snorted. Those brothers whose socks you've washed may face the fate of being target practice by a group of newbies from today onwards. You may feel even more apologetic. Jinwan. I don't think so. Nanheng coldly raised his brows and pointed at Emo Jingshan on the bed with his chin. If you want them to be spared, you have to plead for them. Based on what he said, it wouldn't be good if she didn't plead on his behalf. Jinwan turned her eyes to the bed. Emo Jingshan indifferently glanced at Nanheng. If you continue to use moral coercion on her, I'm afraid those brothers of yours will become targets for 2 years. Last night, Jinwan went to the gynecology department for a checkup too late, so there were some other items that she did not check. Jinwan was called to the consultation room by the doctor. In the ward, Nanheng tossed his phone onto Emo Jingshan's bed. A private message appeared on the screen. The Su family received the news last night. The moment you entered the operating room they came. With Officer Ince around, they weren't able to enter the hospital. However, after Su Shuai was forcefully brought back to America, she must have been frightened by the way the people at the base punished her. It's said that she's been locked up at home, and her mental state isn't good. The Su family is still brooding over this matter and wants an explanation from you. Emo Jingshan coldly glanced at the message on the screen. Mental problems? Nanheng coldly sneered. I think there's an 80% chance that she's really frightened. The psychiatrist visits the Su family every day. It's said that she often doesn't sleep for the entire night. Even the slightest movement would scare her into screaming. The doctor said that she's overly frightened. Emo Jingshan curved his lips slightly, coldly saying, since there's a mental problem, why would they want an explanation from me? I know a psychiatrist in Los Angeles. If they need it, send someone to send her to a mental hospital and treat her. How is this treating her? Emo Jingshan clearly wanted the Su family to lock Su Shuai up at home. Now he wanted to lock her up in a mental hospital. However, what Su Shuai did to Jinwan in T-City, if not for Elder Su's face, Su Shuai most likely would have lost her life. Elder Su already knows that you've returned to America, Nanheng said. Are you going to pick up his call? Emo Jingshan's expression was indifferent. No. Late at night, Los Angeles was even colder than the north of China. The wind was biting. In the Su family in Los Angeles, the window of the bedroom on the upper floor of the villa was wide open. A young woman sat by the window, facing the cold wind, holding a glass of red wine in her hand. She took a sip and looked at the stars and moon in the sky. Her ears were filled with the conversation she occasionally heard when she went downstairs during the day. Emo Jingshan has returned to America. He's in the hospital, but he can't get in. The police and another group of people are guarding the hospital very strictly. We just want to take advantage of his rare return to America to make up for what Shuai has done. Our Shuai only went to T-City to seek justice for her cousin. She was indeed very absurd and offended Mrs. Mo. But no matter what happened, the doctor said that Shuai's brain was severely damaged and her mental problems were even more serious. Shuai is still so young. We can't really let them kill her. Elder Su, no matter what, Shuai is your grandniece. She did this for Jilan. Now that Emo Jingshan refuses to see her, you should at least step forward and speak for her. Since Mrs. Mo is unscathed, why would they destroy Shuai? She is less than 20 years old, a few years younger than Jilan. The Su family has been friends with Shine Group for so many years, and has a relationship with the base. Besides, Jilan used to be engaged to Emo Jingshan, so she can help him. I think it's better for you to solve this problem. Su Jilan gently swirled the red wine glass in her hand, and slowly took a sip. Not long after, she became slightly tipsy. Her watery eyes slowly turned to the room, and looked at the photo frame on the white shelf beside the bed. In the past 2 years, in order to prevent her from going to him, Grandpa had grounded her and forbade her from leaving Los Angeles or America. Chapter 320. She spent the whole day in Emo Jingshan's ward. At 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening, a doctor came to give Emo Jingshan an anti-inflammatory injection, and Jean Wan returned to her ward. Hospitals in the United States did not advocate injections, but Emo Jingshan's back and head wounds were deep, and he had just had an operation, so he needed continuous anti-inflammatory treatment to prevent infection, so he had to have 2 bottles of intravenous drips. However, the speed of intravenous drips was much slower than in China. It was said that this would reduce the possibility of the drug destroying the human body's resistance. After waiting for more than an hour, a bottle of medicine was not even 1/3 used up. So Jean Wan didn't go back and fell asleep in the ward. When she woke up, it was already midnight, and she was awakened by the ding sound of a text message on her cell phone. She guessed that if she didn't sleep by Emo Jingshan's side, she would really have nightmares. Just now, she dreamed of blood again, but this time, it was not Emo Jingshan but herself who was injured in the blood. Jean Wan opened her eyes with a jerk and sat up. The ward was quiet and dark. She turned to see the screen of her cell phone on the bedside, and immediately picked it up to check. Usually, only Xia Tian and Xiaoba liked to send her messages when they were not busy. She thought it was another call from the studio in High City, but the sender was not a number she was familiar with, but a string of foreign numbers. She received not a text message but a photo. Jean Wan hesitantly stared at the photos, stretched out her finger, and clicked on the photos to enlarge them. There were 3 photos. The first one was of the famous Beverly Hills in Los Angeles. Under a row of distinctive European-style buildings, a black limited edition Porsche was parked. The man opened the door and threw something back into the car, and the young woman stood beside him, waiting patiently and leaning her head gently on his back, making an inadvertent posture of snuggling up to the man. This scene was captured in the photo, and the moment she leaned close to him, the sweetness seemed to overflow from the photo. Although the man in the photo had his back to the car door, and his expression could not be seen, Jean Wan recognized that it was Emo Jingshan. The young woman's smile was bright and flamboyant. When leaning against his back, she seemed to know that someone was taking the photo, and happily raised her hands into a V shape, smiling happily in the direction of the camera. The second picture was not taken. Looking at the slightly blurred pixels, it should be a picture taken from a surveillance camera. In the picture, Emo Jingshan had just stepped out of the elevator. From the scene, it seemed to be the elevator of a private apartment in Los Angeles. The opposite door was open, and a young woman came out in a bathrobe. Her hand was in the crook of the man's arm, and half of her body was leaning against his arm. Their posture looked very intimate. The man's face was not in the picture. He was wearing black trousers and a black shirt. It seemed like he had just returned from outside, and returned to the home where he lived with his lover. The third photo was a photo of an engagement ceremony. It seemed like the staff of the hotel, or somewhere had taken the photo from a distance. The floral decorations and dreamy scenes of the ceremony were all captured in the photo. At the end of the red carpet and flowers, the door of a Rolls-Royce limousine opened. On the red carpet, a tall and slender man in a black suit stood silently, without any expression on his face. A young woman got out of the car and walked towards the man. Although the man and woman in the photo were very small due to the background, the moment the woman lifted her skirt, and the diamond engagement ring on her hand was captured in the photo. These 3 photos. If Jean Wan understood correctly, the woman in the photo was the so-called former fiancé of Emo Jingshan. What was the purpose of the person who sent her these photos? Not to mention that Emo Jingshan had explained to her about the engagement in the United States a long time ago, and had personally solved it. Jean Wan had only expressed her dissatisfaction at being kept in the dark by Su Shui, but she had never distrusted Emo Jingshan. Besides, she had just experienced a life-and-death situation with Emo Jingshan. These photos were taken many years ago, and the person who sent them to her at this time was too obvious. But who on earth was the person who sent her these photos? Was it the woman in the photo or some busybody? Even if she didn't think these photos were very revealing, many of the angles of the photos looked only one-sided intimacy, and Emo Jingshan's expression and face had never been facing the camera. But Jin-won had to admit that her heart was still a little moved, and her fingers resting on the phone screen felt slightly cold. Was it because they had returned to Los Angeles, and that woman was ready to show up? Jin-won was still looking at the photos when her cell phone suddenly rang. It was Mo Jingshan calling. She answered the phone. "Why don't you come over to sleep? Aren't you afraid of having nightmares?" The man's voice was warm and light, still a little low and hoarse. It sounded like he had been asked to lie down by the doctor during the injection, and he must have been lying down for a long time. Jin-won slowly rubbed her hand on the phone, saying, "You just had an operation. I'd better not sleep at your place. I'll sleep there in a few days when your wound is better. Just now, when the doctor knew that I slept at your place in the morning, he specially said that your wound and the operation wound need some time to heal, and you can't make any violent movements. I'm just sleeping with you. How can I make any violent movements?" The man chuckled. "Jin-won, the doctor just reminded me. He doesn't want me to disturb your rest. Well, if you don't come over, I'll go over to accompany you now." No. You can't move or get out of bed now." Jin-won hurriedly lifted the quilt and got out of the bed. As she walked out, she said, "I'll go over now. Wait a minute. I'll put on my coat and come over." After getting a satisfactory answer, the man hung up the phone. Jin-won put down the phone and turned to pick up her coat. When she was about to leave the ward, she paused, lowered her head, opened the page of the photos just now, and deleted the 3 photos and messages from unknown sources. There was no need to keep these things. Jin-won didn't think she had a strong heart, but when she was in T-City, she had said that if the other party wanted to steal her man, she should do it openly and not play any tricks behind her back. So what if she was engaged? She was a legitimate Mrs. Mo. She had never thought that an ex-girlfriend was a terrible creature. Relatively speaking, the more the other party liked to use this method to make her presence known, the less she dared to confront her face to face. And the more she liked to play this kind of trick, the less likely the other party was to win. Chapter 321. In the dead of night, because Mo Jingshan's ward was guarded by the people from 11 base, there was no need for too many medical staff to be on duty, so after avoiding the nurses in her ward, Jin-won quietly crept to Mo Jingshan's ward. The people from 11 base would not stop her. Although they felt a little strange that Jin-won would come here so late at night, they just nodded politely to her and let her go. When Jin-won pushed open the door of the ward and entered, she saw that the head of the man's bed had been shaken again. The man was wearing the same light blue hospital gown as her, and his clean hair was more fluffy and messy than usual because he often lay down, but it didn't spoil his handsome appearance. There was a silver 12-inch laptop on his quilt. At a glance, she knew that the Mo Corporation in High City needed him to read some documents. "It's only been a day since the operation, and you're already working?" Jin-won gently closed the door, walked over, and slipped into the man's bed. At this time, Mo Jingshan had finished the injection, and there was only a trace of white transparent medical tape on the back of his hand, but it obviously didn't affect his work efficiency. Mo Jingshan took a look at her, and was about to raise his hand to take Jin-won, who had climbed into the bed, into his arms, when Jin-won quickly pressed his hand down. "Don't hold me. Don't move your arms." The little woman was now very careful about every movement on his body. Mo Jingshan didn't comment but smiled. "It's getting late. Sleep here tonight and don't go back, okay? I just came here quietly to avoid the doctors and nurses. Now I won't go back even if you drive me back." Jin-won said, firmly covered the two of them with the quilt, lay beside him, and looked at the company documents on his computer. He had been in Cambodia for some time. Although there were vice presidents and many reliable managers and assistants in the company, there were still many final decisions that Mo Jingshan had to deal with personally. Judging from the number of unread emails, it could be seen that there were a lot of backlog of documents. "Do these documents need to be typed?" Jin-won asked. Mo Jingshan's hand stroked her hair. As soon as Jin-won finished speaking, he saw that he needed to type a reply. He had just retracted his hand to touch the computer when she suddenly sat up, took the computer away from the quilt in front of him, put her hands on the keyboard obediently, and turned to look at him seriously. How should I reply? Let me help you. Seeing that she was so proactive, Mo Jingshan did not reject her good intentions. He signaled with his eyes for her to look at the other documents on the screen that had already been approved. Write your consent here. At the same time, circle the items that need the attention of the company's departments. Let them arrange it themselves. As Jinwan listened, she quickly typed and highlighted the key points. Half an hour later, there were more than 10 pages of documents. Some required approval, while others required approval or rejection. Previously, when she was in the studio, she sometimes had to face the planning documents submitted by the subordinate departments. However, facing the various documents of such a big company like the MO Corporation, she really felt like an emperor reading the memorials to the throne. The ward was very quiet. Occasionally, a white light flashed on the computer screen when a new email was opened and refreshed. One of them approved the documents on the computer, and the other taught her how to deal with the planning and changes of the various departments. Although Jinwan had a deeper understanding of some decision-making than before she went to T-City, at this moment, such tacit understanding made her feel particularly hard-won. Usually in High City, Mo Jingshan was so busy that he almost didn't have a holiday on weekends. Now, while he was injured in the hospital, he could still teach her how to deal with these matters step by step. The next morning, when Nanheng entered the ward, he saw Jinwan sleeping on Mo Jingshan's bed again. What was more, Jinwan had obviously come last night and didn't go back to her own ward to sleep. As soon as Nanheng arrived, Jinwan woke up and slipped out with an embarrassed expression, saying that she wanted to go back to her ward to wash up and brush her teeth. Seeing Jinwan run away, Nanheng walked in with an expression as if he hadn't slept last night. He pulled a chair over and sat by the bedside saying, "Elder Su called me last night, and Su Shui's parents went straight to their house to make a scene, asking Elder Su to plead for their daughter. Now that you've turned off your cell phone and are living in the hospital leisurely, accompanying your wife every day, kissing, hugging, and playing romantic games, Elder Su knows about my relationship with you, so he directly came to me. Last night, he called me several times in the middle of the night, causing me to not sleep well last night. By the way, Su Shui's parents are influential figures in the Swan Group. Now they are almost breaking their legs for their daughter, and Elder Su often avoids them. Their dispute has been going on for a long time. Now that you've returned to the United States, it's clear that things have escalated to a certain point. If they don't see you in person, they may directly come to the hospital to make a scene." Nanheng looked thoughtfully at Mo Jingshan, who was expressionless, leaned back in the chair, picked up an apple on the table next to him, and took a bite. "I don't think the Su family will give up so easily. Su Shui's parents want to make a scene purely to protect their daughter. But Elder Su, who has never stirred up trouble, now wants to take this matter on his head. Clearly, he has ulterior motives," Mo Jingshan said mildly. Nanheng pondered for a moment. "Indeed, Elder Su is here for you. You've been suppressing him for so long, and not long ago, you made a hard plan to restrict the Su family. In the end, Elder Su hasn't even seen your face. An old man who has been all-powerful in the American-Chinese business world for many years definitely won't be convinced. Besides, he still has a precious granddaughter who can't forget about you." "All-powerful?" Mo Jingshan smiled. For 100 years, the Chinese business circle in the United States has been either black or white. It's not like you don't know which side is behind the Su family's business. In this kind of place, the Su family isn't the only one who can stand firm. Elder Su should be able to tell that your tolerance towards them has been declining. Recently, he has been very close to your father. Back then, wasn't it your father, Chairman Mo, who single-handedly arranged the marriage between you and his precious granddaughter? I think he most likely knows that he can't beat you, so he plans to borrow your father's east wind to stabilize himself." Nanheng smiled faintly. "Based on this old fox's usual tricks, he should know that your weakness is Jinwan. I'm afraid he has already begun to investigate Jinwan. Aren't you afraid that if she continues to stay in the United States, she will be swallowed by the Su family one day when you're not careful? Chapter 322. I don't know if they can swallow it or not, but the Su family will certainly not let the person who occupies the position of Mrs. Mo stay in peace. After all, it's the position that Su Jilan dreams of. Nan Heng said with a faint smile. When we were in China, Feng Ling's cell phone had been installed with an information software connected to Jin Wan's cell phone. Once there are unknown or strange calls and messages, Feng Ling can see them. Last night, Jin Wan received a few photos, but she was very calm and deleted them. If I guess right, she hasn't mentioned it to you until now. What photos? Mo Jingshan put the computer aside and cast his eyes on him. When Su Jilan was with you, her assistant liked to take photos of you. These photos were taken at an angle that could easily be misunderstood. It's not easy to find a few very confusing photos from so many photos. It's even more difficult for Jin Wan to remain calm and not even ask about it. Mo Jingshan's cold eyes swept over him, making Nan Heng feel a chill on his back. Obviously, he was not in the mood to keep him guessing. Photos, Mo Jingshan said in an unkind tone. Hearing this, Nan Heng knew that Mo Jingshan was used to compromise on Jin Wan, so he didn't beat around the bush and threw the cell phone to him. These 3 photos, if I remember correctly, when Su Jilan ran away from home because of a conflict with her grandfather, she lived alone in the apartment. At night, she called you and said that the water heater at home was broken and asked you to help her check it. That night, she was going to leave you there, but you came back in less than half an hour. I've been curious about this for many years, but I haven't found a chance to ask you. Did you touch her at all that night or, too fast? Nan Heng said this with a smile in his eyes, obviously teasing. Mo Jingshan looked at the photos on the cell phone and coldly spat out 2 words. I didn't touch her. For her to be able to keep a screenshot of you entering her apartment's hallway till now, it shows that her heart hasn't cooled even now. If Jin Wan were to see these 3 photos, her heart would probably be experiencing a magnitude 10 earthquake. Did she really not say anything when she came to sleep at your place last night? Mo Jingshan thought of the scene last night when Jin Wan helped him deal with the documents here until late at night, and his eyes darkened. He turned off the cell phone and glanced at the door that Jin Wan had just closed when she walked out. Jin Wan did not return to Mo Jingshan's ward. After washing up, she called Feng Ling to go to the commercial street opposite the hospital to relax. Although the doctor had told Jin Wan to rest in the hospital, she was allowed to simply go shopping. After all, Jin Wan was not injured, and it was good for her body and the child to go out for a walk occasionally. Besides, Feng Ling had seen the photos Jin Wan received last night. When Jin Wan called her, she immediately came to take her out of the hospital. It had been a long time since he had been to the United States. Other than some small shops and small buildings, the streets of Los Angeles had not changed much. It was already a mature international city, unlike China, which was still fully developing and had many investment and business opportunities. The hospital they were staying in was a large, professional, and well-equipped private hospital in Los Angeles. The hospital was located near downtown Los Angeles, very close to the busiest commercial street here. This time, their return to the United States was very sudden, and they didn't bring many clothes back. Jin Wan bought a thick, wet white cashmere coat for herself, and a black cashmere coat for Mo Jingshan in accordance with the same cold season in Los Angeles and High City. One black and one white, she made them look like a couple. She also bought some other clothes that she needed to wear frequently. After they were tired, they passed by a milk tea shop. She couldn't drink anything now, let alone touch milk tea or coffee. Seeing that there was warm milk in the shop, the 2 of them took their bags and sat down in the shop. Feng Ling accompanied Jin Wan all the way and didn't urge her to go back to the hospital early. If she wanted to come in and sit for a while, she would accompany her. If she wanted to drink milk, she would buy it for her. In short, if Jin Wan could digest those hidden unhappy emotions in such a calm way, she would accompany her more, in case she had nowhere to vent and kept calm. Jinwan sat by the window in the milk tea shop. Feng Ling helped Jinwan line up to buy milk, and then went to the other side to buy a small cake. Jinwan sat at the table, drinking milk and looking at her cell phone. It didn't take long before she felt as if someone had been staring at her. She turned to look out, only to see a young woman in a blue custom-made coat, standing by the roadside near the overpass. Her eyes fell accurately in Jinwan's direction through the window. The moment their eyes met, Jinwan recognized the woman in the blue coat. It was the woman in the photo last night. She came so quickly. Jinwan raised her eyebrows. Growing up, she had met all kinds of socialites and daughters in the circle, as well as Ji Min Gran, who had always been scheming against her. She had been used to so many troublemaking and restless women. She had thought that a woman who had a past with Mo Jingxian would at least be someone who could stay calm. At least, her character and means should be several levels higher. However, to her surprise, the other party didn't seem to have much patience. The woman in the blue coat saw that Jinwan had looked this way, and that Feng Ling, who usually accompanied her, was not sitting opposite her. After a moment of silence, she came over, walked into the milk tea shop, opened the door, and went straight in this direction. At such a close distance, their eyes met. Jinwan slowly drank the hot milk in the cup. There was a little sugar in the milk, which was sweet but not greasy. It was so delicious that she didn't want to put down the cup. She glanced indifferently at the woman in the blue coat. The woman was about to come over when she suddenly turned to look at Feng Ling, who was lining up in the sweet area. After a moment of hesitation, her eyes fell on Jinwan again, saying, "Miss Ji, do you want to go to the bathroom with me?" Jinwan looked at her. This beauty in blue did not just want to go to the bathroom. Her face was full of, "I want to talk to you about a day of fighting." She was not stupid. How could she accompany a woman who was a threat to her to avoid Feng Ling's sight? Besides, she was drinking here. Why should she accompany her to the bathroom? Chapter 323. Su Jilan had heard from Su Shui that Jinwan was not someone who could be easily controlled. Seeing that Jinwan wouldn't stand on the passive side at all, Su Jilan pondered for a moment, and then walked over. Jinwan raised her eyes and said lightly, "Jinwan." Because of her initiative, the other party smiled politely at her. Su Jilan. What a friendly way to start a self-introduction. Was her surname also Su? Jinwan asked calmly. "Is Su Shui yours?" "Cousin." Su Jilan's appearance and temperament were both beautiful and aggressive. She was about 1.66 meters tall and wore high heels. Her oval face had a small pointed chin, which made her look even more beautiful. She was wearing a white t-shirt, trousers and a blue coat. Her hair was permed into a casual and generous light wavy style, which fell behind her shoulders. Standing here, she had a proud and superior temperament, and was unrestrained in her beauty. At first glance, one could tell that she was a very flamboyant person. Jinwan nodded in understanding and slowly uttered a word. "Sit." Then she picked up the glass of milk and took another sip. "There's no need to sit. If it's convenient for you, Miss Ji, let's talk somewhere else." Su Jilan glanced at Jinwan drinking milk. She had never heard that Jinwan liked to drink milk, and this was a milk tea shop. It was strange that she would choose pure milk here, but she would never have thought that Jinwan was pregnant. "No matter where I go, Feng Ling will still follow me." Jinwan put down the glass and said coldly and slowly, "If you mind Feng Ling's existence very much, I can ask her to rest in another seat and wait for me." Su Jilan looked at Jinwan calmly for a while, thought about it and sat down. Jinwan was very beautiful, which was a well-known fact, but Su Jilan, whom she met for the first time, was also very beautiful. The two women had completely different aesthetics. Sitting here at the same time, they had become a beautiful scenery in this milk tea shop. Many men would take a few glances at them when they passed by. "Miss Ji, you don't seem surprised to see me. It seems that you know why I'm here." Su Jilan didn't keep her guessing and said with a smile, "You're not what I thought." "Really? In what way?" Jinwan put down her cell phone, raised her eyes, and met Su Jilan's judgmental eyes. There seemed to be a smile in Jinwan's eyes, but the smile was very shallow. Sujilan. A lot. Temperament, character and attitude when you see me and so on. Jinwan's Mwanjilan. Mississippi. Since Miss Sue said that I'm different from what you imagined, it seems like you've specially investigated me and understood me. But I'm sorry, before yesterday, I didn't have any general impression of you, because no one had mentioned you to me. Not to mention your voice and appearance. I didn't even know about your existence. Jilan. And Su Jilan Su's Lan's words, Su Jilan Lan said. And smile Su Jilan immediately. Su Jilan's ex-girlfriend, who was supposed to be a thorn in Su Jilan's heart, was completely ignored. No one would feel good. After all, she was completely ignored, and she was clearly told that she was the one being ignored. Really? It seems that the people around Jingshan have done a good job of protecting and respecting me. Su Jilan smiled, called the waiter, ordered a glass of water and took a sip. Jinwan's cell phone rang. It was a text message. She glanced at it, then half closed her eyes and chuckled. Oh, since you're the one being protected, why did you send me that kind of photo last night? Followed me all the way from the hospital to here. And now you're sitting in front of me, breaking the protection circle they built for you? Don't you feel disappointed? Since you've come to Los Angeles, I have to come to see you. Su Jilan was calm and full of smiles in the face of Jinwan's doubts. Jinwan said casually, Do you know what Su Shui did to me when she was in China? Su Shui looked at her. I came here today to apologize to you on her behalf. Shui and I grew up together. She's my closest cousin in the Su family. She's less than 20 years old this year, so she was a little impulsive. I hope you don't mind, Miss G. But as far as I know, you haven't really been hurt. Let's forget about this matter, shall we? Jinwan glanced at her coldly. It's not up to me whether we can turn a blind eye to Su Shui's matter or not. But can you explain to me what happened to the wedding dress doll that was sent from America, Miss Su? After a pause, the smile in Su Jilan's eyes faded. I thought Miss G was more suitable to communicate in a euphemistic way. At least you still wanted to save some face and not make it too ugly. But obviously, I overestimated you. Jinwan casually leaned against the back of the chair, smiling leisurely. Her facial features were like a work of art created by the hands of God. Her skin was white, her lips were red, and her eyes were beautiful. When she came out of the hospital, for convenience's sake, she tied her seaweed-like long hair into a simple ponytail and let it hang behind her head, which made her look more energetic. The ends of her hair hung behind her back, and only 2 strands of hair by her cheeks fell to her shoulders due to the loose hairband, which made Jinwan's beauty, which was not particularly aggressive, appear much softer. But her eyes were not soft, her tone and her attitude were not soft either. She glanced lazily at the beauty sitting opposite her and said lazily and coldly, Don't make it sound so dignified. It was you who sent that kind of express delivery. I'm holding you responsible. Miss Sue, don't think that everyone has the mood and energy to sit here and play harem tricks with you. Since you're here, just say what you want to say. Don't keep me guessing. Su Jilan sat opposite her, looked at her for a moment, and took out a red velvet box from her bag. This is the ring we got engaged to Jingshan 3 years ago. Miss G, it seems that you haven't worn a wedding ring on your ring finger since you got married. Do you not like the style of the wedding ring? Why don't you take a look at this? Anyway, I don't need it now. If you like it, I'll give it to you. With that, she opened the red velvet box, and inside was a 5-carat heart-shaped diamond ring. Jinwan glanced at the thing in the box. It was big, shiny, and beautiful. Chapter 324. But an engagement ring? It stood to reason that Su Jilan, who came from a rich family like Jinwan, should not be particularly interested in such extravagant and pompous things. But it was clear that Su Jilan was different from her in this respect. Did this Miss Su deliberately pretend to be a little white rabbit in front of her to lower Jinwan's guard? Or was she so naive? She used this kind of thing to disgust people. Jinwan had to admit that her mood, which had not fluctuated for a long time, was indeed disgusted. Speaking of the wedding ring, Jinwan was in the wrong. When she and Imo Jingshan got married, She refused to wear it at the wedding and tried to avoid it. But in the end, Mo Jingshan put it on her. But that night, she threw the ring into the drawer of the bedside table in her bedroom. A few months ago, when she was in the Yew Garden, she deliberately went to look for it but couldn't find it. She guessed that Ji Mengran might have taken her wedding ring away when she was living in the Yew Garden. At that time, Jin Wan and Mo Jingshan did not choose that ring together. Instead, grandfather Mo had ordered someone to have it custom-made abroad. The design was very extravagant and flashy, even more so than the one in front of her. Such a large diamond was indeed not the style she liked. With Mo Jingshan's quiet and low-key personality, he would definitely not like this type, so she did not deliberately look for it again. But now Su Zhilan discussed her with the reason that she hadn't worn a wedding ring. Jin Wan didn't speak for a while. Feng Ling had seen what was going on here after buying the cake. When she saw Su Zhilan, she planned to come over immediately, but when she saw the two of them sitting here and seemed to be chatting calmly, she hesitated and decided not to be nosy, so she waited for a while. However, he only waited for a few minutes before he walked back. Mrs. Mo, the cheesecake was placed in front of Jin Wan, and at the same time, she pushed the red velvet box away a little, blocking Jin Wan's attention from the ring. Feng Ling said, "Let's go back after eating this cake. It's getting late. Mr. Mo will be worried about you." Feng Ling, long time no see. Su Zhilan, who was ignored by Feng Ling, looked at her with a smile. Feng Ling finally turned to look at her and said coldly, "Miss Su." Su Zhilan looked at her with a smile, thought for a while, and quietly closed the red velvet box on the table, saying with a smile, "I heard you returned to Los Angeles, but you have been in the hospital these days. Who on earth is sick? I heard from my grandfather and uncle that the hospital is heavily guarded and can't be entered. Is there anyone who is seriously ill?" "Sorry, I'm just Mrs. Mo's bodyguard. I don't know anything else," Feng Ling answered coldly. Su Zhilan paused and smiled knowingly. "With your ability, Feng Ling, you're actually willing to be a bodyguard. Is it because Nanheng doesn't take you seriously, or is it Jingshan's idea?" Su Li Zhilan Sukin to say that, Su and Su to Su Su to say said, "Angelus a Su Su Su. Miss Su, you worry too much. The relationship between me and Mrs. Mo is not just that of an employer and a bodyguard. We are friends. Although it is my duty to protect her, it is more of my own free will." Su Qingsang smiled coldly and said, "Miss Su, you're right." Su Zhilan couldn't help but feel embarrassed when she saw Su Li Zhilan's attitude. She pursed her lips and suddenly looked at Jin Wan. Feng Ling has always been colder and harder than a man. It's rare that you can get used to her. In the past, when I first came into contact with her, I also... Mrs. Mo, shall we go back? Feng Ling interrupted her and looked at Jin Wan. Jin Wan knew that Feng Ling was not a meddlesome person. She wouldn't intervene in the matter of the legal wife and the ex-girlfriend sitting together. But now Feng Ling obviously didn't want Jin Wan and Su Zhilan to have more contact. "Okay." Jin Wan pushed the uneaten cake in front of her to Su Zhilan and smiled at her. "Miss Su, you followed me for so long. Don't come here in vain. There were so many people waiting in line just now. This cake must taste good. And Feng Ling specially waited in line for so long to buy it. Eat it. We'll go." Seeing that Jin Wan stood up and was about to leave, Su Zhilan was about to say something. But then she hesitated and said calmly, "We haven't talked much, and it's not dark yet. Why are you in such a hurry, Miss Ji?" Jin Wan said, "You've sent me the photos and showed me the ring. Miss Su, no matter how many trump cards you have in your hands, you have to give others some time to prepare. Otherwise, it will seem too deliberate, won't it?" Su Zhilan didn't speak anymore, just smiled and looked at Jin Wan again. However, Feng Ling quickly stood between the two of them, blocking their sight and warning Jin Wan to go back with her immediately. Jin Wan turned and walked out. When she walked to the door of the hospital, Feng Ling suddenly said, "What did she say to you just now? An ex-girlfriend is an existence that makes people unhappy. There's no need to say anything at all. Just sitting in front of me with a confident expression is enough to disgust me. Is there a need to say anything?" Jin Wan said lightly. "But she was very generous and said that she would give me her engagement ring." I wondered if she was really so naive. Although I can see that she is a little impulsive, I don't think she is so simple. Feng Ling said seriously. She is indeed not simple. Don't be fooled by her appearance. Jinwan paused and glanced at her. You mean she is clearly a big wolf, but she pretends to be an innocent little rabbit in front of me? Feng Ling looked at her. Just be careful. She is not easy to deal with. The Su family is also powerful, and the force behind them is not simple. Chapter 325. Jinwan was not surprised at all. I can see that. A person who deliberately dismembered such a cute and beautiful wedding doll, inserted blades, and mailed it from America to High City. I don't believe that she isn't a sinister person. Then why did you sit with her and chat with her? You clearly knew that she came with a purpose. Jinwan glanced at her and sneered. Who said that only she came to test me, and I couldn't test her? Since she came prepared, how could I not be on guard? Then what did you find out? Well, nothing. I just felt that the diamond ring was really big. When Jinwan returned, the doctor was about to change Mo Jingshan's dressing. Mo Jingshan sat on the bed and took off his clothes. Jinwan entered the door and hesitated, considering whether to enter now or after the doctor left. The doctor was standing by the bed saying, Mr. Mo, please turn around. The man did not move and did not give any response as though he did not hear her. The doctor repeated, Mr. Mo, your wound needs to be treated externally every day. Please turn around. He still did not move. The doctor paused and suddenly turned to look at Jinwan, who was standing by the door. Knowing that she was Mr. Mo's wife, he was about to ask her for help when Jinwan came over. Jinwan came to the bed and reached out to put Mo Jingshan's clothes on him, covering only his shoulders and front, revealing his scarred back. Then she gently pushed him to turn around and slowly smoothed the clothes over his shoulders to avoid touching the wound on his back. Mo Jingshan let her do as she pleased, only glancing at the woman's calm face. The doctor glanced at them and was about to come over to apply the medicine, but Mo Jingshan quickly turned away. Seeing his movements, Jinwan immediately frowned. What are you doing? The man turned to look at her and then reached out to pull her, completely ignoring the wound on his back. The moment he raised his arm, Jinwan watched as a drop of blood oozed out from the largest suture on his back. Mo Jingshan. Jinwan's brows furrowed even more. She was about to say something when the man held her waist and pulled her onto his lap. She was forced to sit down. Just now, he had stretched his wound because he had raised his arm. Now his arm was around her waist, and she didn't dare to struggle too much. However, the man's other hand was also holding her tightly in his arms, so she couldn't move. He pressed his lips against her temple, and his voice was low and faint. I'll apply the medicine later. You go out first. The words were addressed to the doctor. You apply the medicine first. What can't you say later? Jinwan still wanted to struggle. She couldn't let his wound have any more problems or delays, but she didn't dare to struggle too much. After moving a few times, she was firmly pressed into his arms. She turned her eyes and glared at him. Mo Jingshan, you really don't take your health seriously, do you? What if your wound is torn and infected again and again? It sounds like a minor wound, but if you don't deal with it properly, it may cause a full-body infection. If something happens, do you want to stay in the hospital for the rest of your life? Or do you want me to stay with you in the hospital for the rest of your life? He withdrew his hand from her body. Jinwan was about to get up, but as if regretting, he suddenly raised his hand and held her back. Then the man kissed her on the cheek, and her ears were full of his low chuckle. Why are you so angry? Jinwan wanted to roll her eyes. She didn't even see the engagement ring that Su Zhilan took out, and now she was even more annoyed to see the blood oozing out of his wound. Apply the medicine first. I'll sit next to you. I won't leave or disturb the doctor. Seeing his pale face, Jinwan knew that he deliberately wanted her to stay here, but she couldn't bring herself to go back to her ward. So she finally compromised. The stalemate lasted for less than a minute. The man finally let go of her. She withdrew her gaze, got up, sat down with a straight face, and said to the doctor, apply the medicine. The doctor nodded and secretly gave Jinwan a thumbs up. Mr. Mo was not a simple person. Doctors like them didn't dare to speak loudly. And if Mr. Mo didn't cooperate, they didn't dare to force him to apply the medicine. However, with just a few words from Mrs. Mo, he obediently turned around and cooperated. While applying the medicine, Jinwan finally had a chance to see the wounds on his back clearly. Although they were sutured well, the wound was too deep, and the wound in the middle of the spine was also deep and large. Although the surgical sutures nowadays were similar to cosmetic needles, and if one was willing to spend money, he probably wouldn't leave any scars, but it would take at least several years for the scars to disappear. She seemed to see the scene when he was hit hard on the back of the hand and the back of the head by the sharp gun butts of the two men. He had been wearing a shirt, and when the doctor treated him, she didn't have the courage to look at the wounds on his back. Now that she saw them, she felt as if a large piece of blood had been dug out of her heart in an instant. She was really distressed. Mo Jingshan was sitting facing Jinwan, and he could see the distress that flashed across her eyes and her slightly red eyes. The softness in the woman's eyes made the man's heart skip a beat. He reached out and held her in his arms. His thin lips kissed her cheek, not too deep or too shallow, and his breath covered more of her skin. Because there was a doctor here, Jinwan turned her head away shyly, but the man's kiss fell directly on her ear, which was her sensitive spot. She shivered and quietly raised her hand to push him in his arms. However, he didn't care that there was a third person present. He kissed her harder and harder, and finally, he held her chin and kissed her hard on the lips. The doctor looked at them as he applied the medicine. He didn't dare to look at them, and tried to keep his eyes on Mo Jingshan's back. After hurriedly changing the medicine, he picked up the gauze and wrapped it up, and then left the ward without a word, not daring to disturb him. Kissed by the man, Jinwan gave up struggling. The door of the ward opened and closed. She knew that the doctor had left. Although she was a little embarrassed, it was too late for her to be embarrassed now. She ignored the man's kiss and just asked with a frown, "Why didn't you apply the medicine just now?" "Because I saw you came back and wanted you to stay." His low, husky voice was against her lips. Chapter 326. He lowered his eyes to look at her, and lightly curved his lips. "You didn't suddenly go shopping because you were angry?" Jinwan's heart ached. She really didn't want her mood to be affected by a certain someone's presence here. She said, "You're perfectly fine in the hospital. Why would I be angry?" The man gazed at her deeply. "I thought you were soaked in jealousy because of those photos taken at a deliberate angle." She was surprised. "How do you even know what kind of photos I've received on my phone?" PhoneLink's phone is installed with an app that connects to your phone. She won't receive normal messages, but she can see messages from strange numbers or unknown numbers. Mo Jingshan did not hide it. "No wonder. Don't you have anything to ask me?" The man looked into her eyes, his handsome face unruffled. "You just said that it's just a few photos taken at a deliberate angle. What else can I ask?" Jinwan turned to pick up the fruit basket that someone had sent over. She took out a fruit knife to cut the fruit, and did not say anything more. After she finished cutting the fruit, she turned back and saw that the man was looking at her. His gaze was indifferent, and she could not see his emotions. Jinwan did not understand. She cut the fruit into small pieces and put them on the plate. She then used a plastic fruit fork to fork and handed it to him. "Here, have some fruit." The man did not take it, nor did he move. He quietly watched her with his dark eyes. "Are you sure you don't want to ask me anything?" Jinwan picked up a piece of fruit and put it into her mouth with a disapproving expression. "You're a man, not a teenager. It's inevitable that you'll have some past. What else can I ask other than forcing myself to accept it, and not pursue it, and not letting my imagination run wild? Should I ask you how you felt when you were engaged for the first time? Or, when you were dating Miss Sue, did you kiss, hug, or sleep with her?" In fact, Jinwan should not have said the latter half of her words. She was just following her heart. Originally, she just wanted to show that she was free and easy. After saying it, she regretted it immediately. However, she could not take back her words. After finishing her words, she avoided the man's gaze, and turned to the table with the fruit platter. You're quite magnanimous. Mo Jingshan's indifferent and unperturbed tone caused one to feel strangely cold. Jinwan did not know why Mo Jingshan suddenly gave her a cold look. She hadn't even had time to adjust her mood, let alone appease Boss Missouri. She put another piece of fruit into her mouth and chewed it hard. She still felt angry, and her chest was stuffy. She said she didn't mind. Her words were also very beautiful, but she couldn't completely ignore it. A woman. She thought she'd better go back to her ward to be alone and figure out what happened to Su Jilan. She put down the fruit plate and the fruit knife and turned to leave. In the end, because she moved too quickly, the fruit knife fell to the ground. She heard it but didn't turn around. Anyway, she didn't use it now. If it fell, then so be it. Someone else would come in and pick it up. I'll go back to the ward first. I'll come back later. Jinwan did not look at Mo Jingshan and was about to walk out. You can go. Mo Jingshan's tone was indifferent. The gentleness and passion from when he hugged and kissed her earlier seemed to have faded away. He had once again become the cold and noble CEO Mo that others spoke of. However, he was the more distant and cold CEO Mo that Jinwan rarely interacted with. She paused and walked to the door of the ward. As soon as her hand touched the doorknob, she suddenly heard something. She turned to see Mo Jingshan stand up by the bed. He got up very slowly, and with some difficulty, and his pale face was still cold. Seeing him get up to pick up the fruit knife, she frowned and hurriedly walked back to pick it up and put it on the table. The man's movements paused, and he raised his eyes to look at her. I was in a bad mood just now. I didn't want to disturb you. Have a good rest in bed. Don't get out of bed and walk around, Jinwan said and turned around. If you're in a bad mood, ask what you want to ask. Why don't you keep your words in your heart? The man's eyes were deep. He looked at her face and forced her to stop. You're in a bad mood. It's not that I'm in a bad mood. I just don't want to be too stubborn and want to think clearly. Mo Jingshan retreated to the bedside and slowly sat down. Clearly the action of sitting down would affect the injury on his back. It was slightly strenuous. His brows furrowed slightly before he turned to look at her. What are you trying to do? Tell me, let me hear it. Right now the most important thing is your health. There's no need to worry too much. Jinwan chuckled uncomfortably. I don't want to vent my jealousy on you. Can you let me calm down first? Hearing the words jealousy, Mo Jingshan couldn't help smiling. Come here. Jinwan didn't want to go over, but seeing that he was about to stand up again, she hurriedly walked over. As soon as she approached, he held her waist with one hand and pulled her into his arms again. Jinwan wanted to get up, but he didn't move. He tightened his arms and kissed her brows. Mo Jingshan planted another light kiss on the corner of her lips. The smile in his voice could not be concealed. You're jealous. Since I saw it, I can't pretend that nothing happened. Earlier, your nonchalant attitude was intentional, right? If you care, then care. Why are you pretending to be indifferent? I can't say that I'll really be jealous of an ex-girlfriend, and there's really nothing wrong with those photos. You shouldn't be jealous, Mo Jingshan said frankly. Mo Jingshan said frankly, nothing happened between me and her. We didn't fall in love or kiss. Even the engagement was arranged by Shine Group. I just went through the motions, but not long after, the engagement was cancelled. Between me and her, it was never what you think. Jinwan hadn't recovered from his words when she suddenly heard the man say in a low and heavy voice, You just said that you don't mind that I have a so-called past, that you don't mind that I've kissed, hugged, or even slept with others, eh? Jinwan, you're really magnanimous. Mo Jingshan suddenly chuckled. There was an indescribable danger in his tone. So, should I think of a way to give you a surprise? If I really had such a woman, I should really let the two of you have a good fight and see who's more powerful. Jinwan, no. She stiffened in his arms and shook her head firmly. Absolutely not. Chapter 327. Just now I was just speaking casually. Speaking casually? You can make your words sound so absolute. Mo Jingshan looked at her, his tone as cold as frost. You wish for a woman to lean on me like you do, to have the right to control my emotions and body, and I will do my best to satisfy her. You wish for such a person? He then said coldly. Or, I can arrange a place for her like the Yew Garden. We can sleep in the morning and wake up at dusk, have 3 meals together, live together, and be more like you. On the sofa, on the bed, on the carpet, in the bathroom, in every corner of the room, we are intimately intimate. Would you still say you don't mind? Would you hesitate even if you want to be jealous? Was this man deliberately using a knife to cut her heart? From the moment Jean Wan received the photo last night to the moment she saw the ring, she kept telling herself not to be angry, not to mind, and that it was all right. But it turned out that a person's possessiveness could be so strong. It was so strong that even an analogy and assumption was like a blunt knife slowly grinding against her bones. The sharp pain seemed to instantly spread to her limbs and bones. Jean Wan, can you accept all this magnanimously? Jean Wan. Wasn't he referring to herself as the one who wanted to save face and suffer? Jean Wan suddenly seemed to deflate. She directly leaned her head against the man's shoulder, softly saying, I'm not willing. You can only belong to me. Screw his rationality. Screw his pride. Her own husband was hidden by herself. She would never give up this position to anyone who wanted to snatch it away. She raised her hands to hug his neck tightly, burying her face in his neck. She breathed in the clear scent of disinfectant on his body and snuggled even tighter in his embrace. Her voice was muffled as she said against his neck, If you dare to treat other women so well, I won't be able to get over it. Mo Jingshan, let me tell you, between us, we will only be separated by death after 100 years. There will never be a separation of life. Mo Jingshan abruptly held her chin, bending down to kiss her lips harshly. As he sucked on her lips repeatedly, he bit down on the tip of her tongue. She trembled and heard the man say hoarsely against her lips, Remember what you said earlier. Which one? The last one. Jean Wan couldn't tell when she began to kiss Mo Jingshan. If it weren't for the fact that he couldn't move because of his injury, and if it weren't for the fact that she was pregnant, this man would have pressed her down on the hospital bed and done something to her. But even so, the man still tried his best not to tear his wound while pressing his body against hers. Jean Wan originally wanted to say that this was a ward and that someone could come in at any moment, but the man's kiss was domineering and firm, accurately pressing against her lips. At first, he thought it was just a kiss, but it got out of hand. It wasn't until the buttons on the patient's gown were undone and the man's kiss landed on her fair neck that she suddenly shivered because of this unique stimulation. She gradually returned the kiss with her impulsive calmness. Ugh, don't. The man ignored her resistance and said, Don't move. This is a ward, and I'm pregnant. The man didn't say anything as he kissed her lips and cheeks. Jingshan, you're still injured. Ugh. It didn't matter if she was injured. What mattered was that she was pregnant and couldn't be touched in the first 3 months. Jean Wan had just experienced a rush and now had to take good care of her body. She couldn't be careless at all, and she couldn't stand any more torment. The man pressed against her tightly, imprisoned her freedom, and kissed her collarbone and her shoulder. If he hadn't been injured, Jean Wan would have pushed him away, but now she could only struggle carefully. Footsteps passed by from time to time outside the ward. Every time this sound approached, Jean Wan would stiffen nervously, but the more she did this, the more the man's body rubbed against hers. They hadn't hugged each other deeply for so long, and her desire for him was no less than his, both mentally and physically. What's more, his kisses kept rolling over her neck, collarbone, and ears, making her calm and self-control gradually collapse. Mo Jingshan was obviously still rational. He restrained himself from continuing, but after all, he was very familiar with all the sensitive points of her body, and the two of them hadn't been together for a long time. So Jean Wan quickly reacted. She whimpered under his touch and kiss. She abruptly buried her face in his neck, unable to suppress her breathing. She hoarsely begged, Jingshan, you don't miss me? And the man kissed her cheek, pressed his lips against hers, and said hoarsely in a low voice, This taste, it's really torture. The man's fingers had almost peeled off her hospital gown. The more turbulent he was, the faster he recovered his reason. His thin lips pressed against her ear, and he coaxed in a low voice, "Sleep here with me tonight. Don't make me call you to come over again. I can't touch you or eat you, but at least let me hold you and see you." Jean Wan's cheeks were hot from the man's teasing, and she slowly nodded against his neck. The two of them spent the whole night in bed. To be exact, Jean Wan was pressed on the bed by Mo Jingshan. Although it was inconvenient for him to do too much because of his injury, hugs and kisses were enough. Jean Wan didn't know that a simple kiss could last for a long time. For example, a kiss could last for at least half an hour, and it didn't even feel monotonous. Jean Wan didn't feel that she slept for long, but when she opened her eyes again, there was some light in the ward, which shone through the curtains and cast a dazzling light on the white quilt. "You're awake." The man's voice came from her side. Jean Wan turned her head and saw that Mo Jingshan, who was leaning against the headboard, had closed his laptop. He was only wearing the hospital gown loosely, and there was a suspicious red kiss mark on his neck, which was particularly eye-catching on his recently pale skin. Of course, Jean Wan knew who did it. Although they did not do anything last night on this bed, after being teased for so long, she could not help but kiss him, nibble him, and bite him. She glanced at him, and quickly shifted her gaze away. "What are you shy about?" Her little movement was naturally caught by the man, who chuckled. Chapter 328. Why didn't you say you were embarrassed when you kissed me last night? The man deliberately pulled open his clothes to show her the hickeys on his chest. "You bit me too," Jean Wan argued in a low voice, but still reached over to tug at his clothes and buttoned him up one by one. However, even the top button couldn't cover the obvious hickey on his neck. "Really?" Mo Jingshan asked pretentiously, and reached out to lift Jean Wan's clothes. "Let me see." Jean Wan was afraid that he would ignite the fire in her again early in the morning, so she rushed to lift the quilt and get out of bed. Mo Jingshan was injured and couldn't chase after her, so he didn't insist. He watched the little woman run out of the door with a blushing face as she fastened her clothes. However, Jean Wan ran so fast that she forgot to take her cell phone. Before she opened the door, she suddenly heard the cell phone she left by his bed ring. She paused and looked back to see that the man was holding her cell phone calmly and looking at her. Jean Wan rushed back. When she took the cell phone from his hand, she saw that it was Xiao Ba's number. She quickly cleared her throat and answered the call. "Hello. Boss Wan, are you up? It should be morning in the United States, right?" Xiao Ba asked cheerfully. "Yes, I'm up." Jean Wan looked at the time. It was getting late in China. At least, it was time to get off work. Recently, the price of housing and land in China have been rising. The resources in our studio have been attracted by many big companies. These days, our conference room is almost full. Many people have come to bid for the studio. Sister Xia Tian said that when you come back, you can consider moving the studio out of Jinlin building and change to a formal independent office building. Otherwise, those people who come to us with money will have no place to sit. Xiao Ba said with a smile. "Boss, before you come back, shall we help you find a suitable place in High City to move the studio?" It was already January, and the Chinese New Year was coming. In the new year, the trend of domestic housing prices had gradually begun to rise. I'll take a look when I get back." "It's already so late, and you're still not off work?" "No, Sister Xia Tian left a little earlier today. She handed over some of the work on hand to me for the time being. I can get off work in about half an hour." "What is she doing?" Little Eighth suddenly chuckled. "Dating Jean Wan." She suddenly raised her eyebrows. What kind of relationship does she have? The last time Sister Xia Tian injured someone with her walking stick and was taken away by the police station, the police officer who interrogated her was also transferred from S City, and he was a special police officer who was temporarily transferred here. Xia Tian's family is also in S City, right? Recently, the two of them have been in close contact. Before Jean Wan could come back to herself, Xiao Ba said that she was going to print some documents and get ready to get off work. So she hung up the phone. Jean Wan held the phone for a long time before she understood. What was going on? Was this someone Spring? Xia Tian, who she had always been worried about, had finally opened up a new line of love, instead of maintaining the path of the scumbag from her previous life. But who was the police officer in the police station last time? At that time, the matter was too complicated and rushed, and she did not pay much attention to what the police officer in the interrogation room looked like. TSK, this woman Xia Tian actually made big news behind her back. No wonder she did not often send text messages to harass her these days. It turned out that she had changed the target of her complaints. Mo Jingshan lazily leaned against the headboard, watching Jin Wan's somewhat complicated expression, as though her good sister was about to be taken away by a wolf. The studio is moving to a new location? The man's light words brought Jin Wan back to herself. Jin Wan hurriedly shifted her gaze away from the hickey on his neck, and after a moment of silence she said, "Previously, the office location in Jin Lin building was only a temporary one. Now that there are more frequent investors and bidders, the environment of my small studio is indeed not good enough. If we really want to change the location, we may have to consider moving to a place near the construction bureau. That way, it will be closer and more convenient when we go to apply for documents in the future. Let Qin Sighting help you choose a location. He often contacts people from the construction bureau." Mo Jingshan looked at Jin Wan's serious expression and chuckled softly. Dr. Qin? Will it be too much trouble for him? He can't wait for you to trouble him," Mo Jingshan casually said. "Recently, Shida Group has been making a lot of noise in China. The Qin family and Shida Group happen to be working together. He and his old love should see each other often. In these dark days, it's good to find something else for him to do." In the afternoon, Jin Wan went back to the ward to take a shower, while Mo Jingshan was receiving an anti-inflammatory injection. In the past few days, she had been quite idle in the hospital. She ate, slept, bathed, and accompanied her husband. She didn't have to face the storm-like dangers of the past few days, nor did she have endless work waiting for them as soon as she opened her eyes in High City. However, when Jin Wan was taking a shower, she did not know that an uninvited guest suddenly came to the hospital. Mo Jingshan's injection was halfway through, and K of 11 base was in charge of guarding outside the ward area with several brothers. Not long after, K suddenly knocked on the door and came in. "Mr. Mo, Miss Su is here." Mo Jingshan was still a little pale, but his face was cold and calm. "Didn't Nanheng tell you that no one from the Su family is allowed to come in?" "I know, so I didn't let Miss Su enter your ward area. She waited outside for a while. Seeing that we didn't let her in, she just left." Mo Jingshan closed his eyes again, and Kay suddenly remembered something and said, "By the way, just now, after Miss Su left, our men saw her go to Mrs. Mo's ward area. Although there are people guarding there, they used to be friends with Miss Su, so they may let her in." Mo Jingshan opened his eyes again and looked coldly at Kay. As soon as he met Mo Jingshan's cold eyes, Kay had a hunch that things were not good, so he immediately shut up and did not dare to say more. Mo Jingshan suddenly sat up, quickly pulled out the needle on the back of his hand under Kay's startled gaze, and lifted the quilt to get out of bed. However, because the surgical wound on his back hadn't healed after 3 days, his face turned pale because of the pain. Kay rushed to stop him, but Mo Jingshan had already gotten out of bed. Ignoring the trace of blood on the back of his hand dripping down the blood vessels, because he pulled out the needle too quickly, he walked out expressionlessly. Chapter 329. Jin Wan was not surprised that Su Zhilan came to the hospital. What was strange was that she couldn't sit still. They had just met in the milk tea shop, but in the blink of an eye, she came straight to the hospital. Jin Wan had just come out of the bathroom in the ward. Her hospital gown was a little loose, and the collar had not been completely fastened. She was drying her hair when she suddenly saw Su Zhilan, who had pushed the door open and come in. "Miss Su." The moment she saw the other party, Jin Wan glanced at her in surprise. Su Zhilan stood at the door of the ward and saw that Jin Wan had just taken a shower. She suddenly saw a red mark on Jin Wan's open chest. Her eyes flickered and she looked away, saying calmly, I thought someone was sick. I didn't expect that Miss G also has a ward. Do you have a cold, or are you not feeling well? I heard you were here, so I came to see you. Did I disturb you? Of course not. But if you had come a few minutes earlier, I might still be in the bathroom. Jinwan dried her hair again, put down the towel, and casually tidied up her clothes, saying indifferently, Miss Su, what's your purpose in coming to the hospital? I heard that Jingshan was injured. Jinwan didn't stop smoothing her cuffs. She didn't even lift her eyelids. Who told you the news? Su Zhilan smiled. I have some connections with several people in Nanhang's base. After all, the Su family also has an important position in the American arms trade. But the Su family doesn't rely entirely on this business, so they haven't been involved in it in recent years. But 11 Base used to have a close relationship with the Su family, so it's not difficult for me to get some information from these acquaintances. Jinwan didn't respond, and continued to smooth the creases on her cuffs. Last night, Mo Jingshan had pressed on her for almost the entire night. Her arm had been pressed down by him the entire time. Her clothes had clearly been washed yesterday, and she had just gotten a new set from the hospital. Yet after one night, it had become so wrinkled. Those who didn't know better would think that she had not changed her clothes for many days. Seeing that she was always so gentle and indifferent, Su Zhilan suddenly smiled. Miss G, you should know Jingshan's injury, right? Is he seriously injured? So many people from 11 Base are guarding the hospital, and I heard that even Officer Ensa's men have been alarmed. I'm very worried about Jingshan's injury. If you're worried, just go to visit him. What are you doing here? Jinwan raised her lips and looked at her with a faint smile. Miss Su, since you're so familiar with the people in the base, and treat them like your own people, I'm sure the people guarding outside his ward won't dare to stop you. You can visit him if you want. There's no need to explain to me about this kind of courtesy visit in the hospital. I won't mind an old friend of my husband's visit. Su Zhilan looked at Jinwan, and after a moment of silence she said, Their base is filled with new blood all year round, and there must be some people who don't know me. It's not convenient for me to go there rashly. What if I'm stopped? Jinwan home. And Su Zhilan. G of her heart. 1. G of Zhilan. She. Of. She of A. He had already experienced the awkwardness. So why did he come to her place to show his existence? New blood? The people on duty outside Mo Jingshan's ward were all veterans of the base like Feng Ling Kei, and the others had been with Nan Heng for many years. How could they not know Su Zhilan? That's true. It's indeed quite awkward to be blocked outside the door by someone you think you're close to. When she sat down, she picked up her cell phone and said absent-mindedly, as she looked at the news that popped up on her cell phone, I don't have anything to visit here. Besides, Miss Su, I'm not very familiar with you. Now that you've seen me, the air in the hospital is not good. You'd better go back early. I'll tell Jingshan about your visit. We appreciate your kindness. Jinwan didn't mean to be polite to her at all. She didn't even ask her to find a place to sit in the ward. However, Su Zhilan had no intention of leaving. She moved to the bedside and pointed to the chair on the opposite side. May I sit down? Jinwan was still looking at her phone. Without lifting her eyelids, she calmly responded. If you want to sit, then sit. Miss G seems to be afraid of me. Su Zhilan took a look at her, took a chair, and sat down, sitting opposite Jinwan in a dignified manner. Hearing this, Jinwan burst out laughing. I don't want to say too much, lest I hurt you. Su Zhilan raised her eyebrows and was about to speak, when Jinwan put down her cell phone and looked up at her. Although Jinwan's hair was slightly wet and scattered on her back, and she looked particularly fresh and clean after taking a shower. Compared with Su Zhilan's beauty, Jinwan's attitude was neither hurried nor slow. In such a situation, Su Zhilan couldn't guess what Jinwan was thinking. She had personally tested Jinwan's bottom line, and learned from Su Shui that Jinwan was a woman who looked simple, but was not easy to deal with. It turned out that Jinwan was not affected by the photos and the ring at all. Su Zhilan hesitated and suddenly went straight to the point. Miss G, you said you never knew of my existence before you received those photos. So do you know who I am now? Jinwan glanced at her and lazily sneered. You've already introduced yourself and taken out the engagement ring. There's no need to repeat your self-introduction. I'm not interested in your name and identity, and have the patience to listen to it too many times. Seeing the calm look on her face, Su Jilan paused for a moment, then suddenly curled her lips and said, Miss Ji, although I didn't come with good intentions, I admit that my purpose is Jingxin. No one can accept the fact that a man you once loved has become the husband of a woman who came out of nowhere. But your attitude shows that you just want to cling to Mo Jingxin, and you don't care whether he has had other women or not, right? Ji Yunshu said. Miss Ji, although I didn't come with good intentions, I admit that my purpose is Jingxin. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.